Chapter 894. The capital of the Jing Kingdom was the most prosperous and affluent place in the Jing Kingdom. It was also the holy land in the hearts of scholars in the Jing Kingdom. There were many wealthy families and great scholars here. Countless scholars in the Jing Kingdom flocked to this place. Compared to the places outside the capital region, there were undoubtedly more opportunities here. In the private garden of a famous scholar in the capital, dozens of young scholars were scattered around the garden in groups of 3 to 5, chatting and laughing with each other. Somewhere, a young man in green frowned and said, "No matter how I look at it, Lord Li doesn't look like a treacherous official. Think about it. He has done so much for our Jing Kingdom in the past few years. Even you and I have benefited a lot from him. How did he become a treacherous official? He has repeatedly tried to stop the king of Shu from entering the capital and obstructed His Majesty from assigning the position of the Eastern Palace. He must have some kind of wild ambition." The eyes of the person beside him flashed, and he shook his head. "You don't even trust the Grand Tutor and the great scholars?" Hearing this, the young scholar's face quickly showed hesitation. In other places in the garden, people's conversations were also limited to the matter of purging the emperor's side that had caused an uproar. The king of Shu is the legitimate crown prince. It is in line with the ancestral system and ethical principles. Although the eldest princess is as talented as a man, she is a woman after all. It is not a solution to go on like this. He thinks that he can interfere with the selection of the crown prince by relying on His Majesty's favor. If he isn't a treacherous official, what is? This kind of treacherous official usually doesn't have a good ending. In a pavilion in the garden, 2 old men were sitting opposite each other and playing chess. After the old man with the white piece put down a piece, he said, "Brother Chu has never cared about these court affairs. Why is he so radical this time? Strange, strange." The old man with the black piece picked up a piece and thought for a moment before putting it down. He said, "Not to mention that Brother Chu is a little strange. The position of the Eastern Palace should not be left empty. It is the right way for the eldest prince to enter the Eastern Palace. How can the court affairs be controlled by a woman for so long?" "Pa!" The old man holding the white chess piece suddenly put down the chess piece and said angrily, "Women taking over the government? Her Majesty's move is really stupid. The Women's Union, the Women's College, look at what she has done. What a mess. A few days ago, I visited an old friend. That old friend's granddaughter actually told me that the teachers of the Women's College told them that it was impossible for parents with single eyelids to have children with double eyelids. That's utter nonsense. His Majesty and Imperial Consort Cui both have single eyelids. I've seen the King of Shu with my own eyes. He clearly has double eyelids." His tone was resentful. "When I'm done with this part, I'll definitely submit a memorial to the Women's College. Let's focus on the matter at hand first." However, the elder did not pay much attention to what he said. After placing down another black chess piece, he smiled and said, "Brother Zhao, you've lost. Although the Zeng family's mansion is big, it's not a good idea for you to live here all the time." Li looked at drunken Mo and asked, "Why don't you just move over? Whenever you miss this place, you can come back and stay for a few days." She shook her head and said, "I won't leave Sister Ruoqing behind." Li comforted her. "Who said you two should separate? When the time comes, Ruoqing will move over together, and you two can still live together. That's nothing. Even if you agree, Sister Ruoqing won't." She tilted her head and looked at Ruoqing. "Don't you think so, Sister Ruoqing?" Wan Ruoqing just smiled and did not answer. Li looked at her and said, "All right, but the old madam has been talking about you for a long time. Let's pick a time, and I'll take you to see her." "Ah, the old madam of the Li family?" Her expression immediately became a little flustered. Li nodded and said, "If you don't go, I'll have to bring the old madam to see you." "This matter." She stood up, and the panic and nervousness on her face were even more obvious. She stammered, I haven't brushed my teeth today." Seeing her run into the room in a panic, Li could only shake his head. He understood her concerns, and it was not good to force her on such a matter. After she left, the smile on Ruoqing's face gradually faded. She looked at him with some worry and said, "I've heard the rumors outside. Mrs. Chen also asked me to bring you a message. Don't have a direct conflict with those people. Has the matter really reached such a serious point? Don't worry, it's just a small trouble. It will be solved soon. Li stood up and looked at the closed door. He estimated that it would take a long time for drunken Mo to brush her teeth this time. After saying goodbye to Xiao Cui, he looked at Wan Ruoqing and said, "Let's go out for a walk." It was early May, and the weather was not very hot. Out of the Zeng mansion, Wan Ruoqing comforted him. Drunken Mo should still be a little worried. I've been persuading her these days. I think after a few days, she will agree to move over. Li tilted his head, looked at her, and asked, "What about you?" "Me." Wan Ruoqing was stunned and said, "After all, I've lived here for a long time. I'm still used to Willow Lane. I'll probably move back there. The house is too big, and it's always a little lonely with only a few people living there. It won't be lonely if there are more people." When walking to the door of the brothel, Li smiled and said, "You go in first. I have something to do. In a moment, forget it. Let's talk about it later." Wan Ruoqing looked at him and asked, "Will you come back in a moment?" "Depends." Li wanted to say that he would see how it went. Seeing her look at him, he swallowed the words that were in his throat and nodded. "Come here." On the street, the sloppy old man limped behind him, but his speed was not slow. He shook his head and said, "When you're young, you do what you think in your heart. It's better to regret now than to lament when you're old." Li looked at his legs and said, "You go to second uncle every day, but you can't beat him. Why bother? What do young people know?" The sloppy old man curled his lips disdainfully and said, "If I meet Taoist nun again now, I can let her use one hand." Li stopped before the guru finished bragging, because they had arrived at the Chu family. The gatekeeper of the Chu family was very polite. When he saw the young man and the old man, he asked them very politely if they had an invitation. When he learned that they did not, he also politely told them that the grand tutor was meeting some old friends today, and would not see any guests. If they did not have an invitation, they should come back another day. Li smiled and said, "Please inform them that I'm here to visit the grand tutor. If the grand tutor really doesn't want to see us, we can leave." The gatekeeper saw that the young man in front of him was extraordinary. Although the old man behind him was not very agile, his eyes were very scary. He could not figure out their identity and said, "Wait a minute, I'll go inform them. However, it's not certain whether the grand tutor will see you or not." "Ning Chun." He murmured the name and quickly ran in. Somewhere in the capital, two figures walked out of a brothel. Hearing the gossip of the people around them, the middle-aged man turned his head and asked the man beside him, "Some people in the capital say that Sir Li is a pillar of the court, and some say that he is a traitor. Wu Er, what do you think?" "I don't know. I'm not very familiar with Sir Li." The man beside him shook his head, thought for a moment and said, "However, I still think that Sir Li has been wronged." The middle-aged man looked at the crowd and murmured, "Since he has been wronged, why doesn't he respond to the rumors in the capital and the fights in the court?" Wu Er sighed and said, "Who knows? Don't worry." The middle-aged man patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Sir Li is a hero of his generation. These clowns won't last long in front of him. We have to believe in him." Chapter 895. The Chu family. In the main hall, other than Grand Tutor Chu, there were several elders of similar ages. They all wore loose Confucian robes and had righteous expressions. Their bearing was extraordinary, and they seemed to have a noble character. A thin elder shook his head and said, "It's a pity. Although Grand Tutor Wang resigned long ago, and the Wang family has always kept a low profile, if he was willing to stand out, the matter would not have been dragged out to this day." Another elder with a serious expression sighed and said, "Grand Tutor Wang, I once personally went to invite him, but he tactfully refused. He said that he was old and did not care about the affairs of the court." His words revealed his admiration for that sycophant. Back then, when the envoy of the Qi kingdom caused havoc in the capital, no one in the vast capital dared to fight. Grand Tutor Wang dragged his sick body to court and was persuaded by everyone. You all know what happened next. It's no wonder he was so impressed. It's fine if Grand Tutor Wang doesn't help either side. But isn't this Qin when Brother Chu's disciple? This time, he actually joined forces with many important officials in the court to speak up for that sycophant. If not for that, why didn't the officials respond as soon as Brother Chu spoke? The matter has been dragged on for so long. It's not just the officials. I'm afraid that even the common people will have to put in more effort. As they drank tea and discussed, a servant of the Chu family walked in from outside. He walked to Grand Tutor Chu's side and whispered a few words. Ningchen. Grand Tutor Chu frowned slightly. He had no impression of this person at all. When the gatekeeper saw this, he felt a wave of regret. He hurriedly said, "I'll send them away immediately." Wait. He quickly walked out of the door, and a voice came from behind him. Grand Tutor Chu looked at him and asked, "You said that he is a young man about the same age as Ping Er, and that he is handsome and has an extraordinary bearing?" The gatekeeper immediately nodded. "He is handsome and much more handsome than young master Ning Chen sycophant." Grand Tutor Chu murmured. A hint of doubt appeared on his face as he said in a low voice, "Let him in." At the entrance of the Chu family, the gatekeeper ran over and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He respectfully said to Li Yi, "Young master, please come in." Compared to the other rich and powerful families that Li Yi had seen, the Chu residence wasn't very big. In fact, it could even be said to be on the small side. Perhaps it was also because the Chu clan didn't have many descendants, and the 2 generations of the clan only had one son. Too large of a residence couldn't be used, and it would seem deserted. Led by the servant, they did not pass through the main residence, but took a small path to the left. Not long after, they arrived at a small garden. A figure dressed in a gray Confucian robe stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Li Yi wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but he felt that the body of this royal tutor was much hunchier than the last 2 times he saw him. The old man turned his head and asked calmly, "This old man has always been curious. When you saw me on the street that day, why did you hide?" At this moment, Li Yi realized that not only was his back hunched, but his complexion was also much older than before. It was as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. "I was afraid that you would blackmail me," Li Yi said honestly. "Unfortunately, I couldn't escape in the end." The 2 of them had been at loggerheads in the court that day, but when they met again, there was not the slightest atmosphere. The old man looked at him with a sharp gaze and asked, "You repeatedly prevented the eldest imperial son from entering the capital. Do you think that this old man has wronged you?" Li Yi smiled and said, "As for the reason, the royal tutor naturally understands." "Actually, I can understand the royal tutor." Li Yi gazed at the neatly trimmed flower garden to the side and slowly said, "The Chu clan has been a clean stream among the scholars of the Jing kingdom for many generations. They represent righteousness and righteousness. A mere sycophant naturally cannot compare to the Chu clan's century-old reputation." Royal Tutor Chu's expression was calm, but his fists, which were hidden in his sleeves, were tightly clenched. His veins were bulging. "I know that Cui Qingming used some shameful methods to get hold of the Chu clan's weakness." Li Yi shook his head and continued, "Your grandson deserves it, but the Chu clan should not be implicated. Even if the Cui clan exposed those scandals, it will not shake the Chu clan's foundation. Although it will inevitably damage the Chu clan's reputation, it will not be difficult to make up for it in the future." He gazed at Royal Tutor Chu again. "What is difficult is the Royal Tutor's choice." Royal Tutor Chu stared at him. A moment later, he unclenched his fists and said, "All of this is just your one-sided statement. There is no stain on the Chu clan, and there is no need to make up for it." Li Yi met his gaze for a long time before sighing. He cupped his fists and said, "Since that's the case, Royal Tutor, this sycophant bids farewell." Just as he was about to walk out of the garden, he stopped and turned back to ask, "Was it worth it?" This time, he did not receive any response from the old man. When he walked out of the Chu household, the unkempt old man saw that his expression was relaxed. There was no hesitation or apprehension from before. He asked in surprise, "What, did you succeed?" Li nodded. "It's done." The unkempt old man was somewhat disappointed along the way. He thought he could watch a great show, but from the looks of it, there wasn't much hope. When he arrived at the entrance of the brothel, he asked again, "How long will I be staying inside today? I'll go out for a walk." "I'm not going back today." Lee waved his hand. "You can walk as long as you want. Just let me know at home before nightfall." "You're not going back." The unkempt old man looked at him in surprise and asked, "Are you sure?" Lee nodded and stepped into the brothel. Recently, there hadn't been many exciting shows at the brothel. The customers were already beginning to complain. It was time to add something new. He habitually glanced at the small building in front of him and happened to meet a gaze from the window of the loft. Lee was startled for a moment. Then he smiled and waved his hand towards that direction, then walked over quickly. "He's not coming back tonight." "The Lee family?" Mississippi Lou frowned. "Where is he?" The unkempt old man shrugged. "A place to watch a show." Mississippi Lou waved her sleeves. "Take me there." Rui grabbed her arm and shook her head. "My husband said before he went out this morning that he had something important to do today. He might not come back tonight." "What are you going to do?" "I'm not going to look for him." Mississippi Lou shook her head and said, I'm going to watch a show." In the room above the loft of the brothel, when Lee saw Ruoqing writing, she frowned slightly and seemed to be in pain. He asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" She put down the pen and looked at her fingers. She shook her head and said, "Maybe I've held the pen for too long these 2 days. There are blisters." Lee saw that there was a blister on her fingers. He frowned and said, "Forget it. Don't write anymore. When I finish writing this chapter, you can tell me how to arrange it, and I'll write it down." Lee put down the pen and said, "I'll help you pop the blister first. You can rest for a while." He took out a sterilized needle. These things were always available here. He held her hand and poked a hole in the blister. He squeezed out the liquid inside, but didn't completely pop it. He looked up and asked, "Does it hurt?" "No." Ruoqing smiled and shook her head. Lee nodded and said, "The wound needs to be disinfected. I'll apply some alcohol on it now. It might hurt a little. Just bear with it." Even though she was mentally prepared, when he applied the alcohol, she couldn't help but let out a suppressed cry of pain when she suddenly felt the stinging pain. "It hurts. Just bear with it." Mississippi Lou stood outside the door with a livid face. When she heard the woman's suppressed voice, she finally couldn't help but push the door open and enter. "Don't touch water these days and don't write." Lee put down the things in his hands and looked at her to remind her. Then he turned to look at Mississippi Lou and asked in surprise, "Rui, why are you here?" Mississippi Lou glanced around the room and then looked at Lee. She said lightly, "I'm here to ask you to go home for dinner." Chapter 896. Women were really strange. She said that she wanted to invite him back for a meal, but she left by herself. It was likely that the sloppy elder's girlish heart had run wild, and he had forgotten to bring a message back. Time was tight to begin with, so there was no need to waste any more time. Lee held a cold steamed bun in his mouth and wrote as he ate. He turned to Wan Ruoqing and said, "If you haven't eaten, go out and eat something first. I still need a while to finish." Wan Ruoqing nodded and went out. When she came back again, she was holding a food box in her hand. She looked at Lee and shook her head. "You can't just eat steamed buns. I bought some porridge. Have some." Lee nodded and said, "Leave it there first. I'll eat it later." He wasn't too hungry. Of course, the most important thing was to hurry up. After leaving the Chu family today, there was no turning back. There was no need to hold back against an enemy. After writing a few words, a gentle voice sounded in his ear. "Open your mouth." Lee paused and looked back at her. This scene was so familiar. He subconsciously opened his mouth, and she gently placed the spoon in. An interesting play not only needed a brilliant script, but the stage layout, the actors' acting skills, as well as their expressions and lines were all very important. All he could do was the first step. The rest of the more detailed and tedious matters had to be left to professionals like her. After he wrote the first chapter, he discussed these matters with her for more than 2 hours. They discussed from day to night. Lee saw the fatigue between her brows and said, "I'll write the next chapter. Rest for a while." Wan Ruoqing nodded and didn't refuse. She had been busy until late last night, so she was actually a little sleepy. She still had to discuss the second chapter later, so it was beneficial to take a short rest now. She leaned over the small table by the bed and looked at the flickering candlelight before slowly closing her eyes. Pa! The oil lamp gave off a spark and let out a soft sound. When she slowly opened her eyes, she found that she was lying on the bed, covered with a thin layer of quilt. She got up from the bed and looked in a certain direction subconsciously. There was no one at the table. Has he gone back? The paper spread out on the table should be the finished script. She picked it up and looked at it. It was indeed finished. It was dark outside the window. It was already very late. After tomorrow, she would be busy again, and even busier than before. In order to ensure enough energy, she had to rest early even though she wasn't sleepy. She took off her coat and only wore a doo-doo. She put it on the cabinet and sat on the bed. Just as she was about to take off her shoes and socks, the door was pushed open from the outside. Usually, only she and Yu Zhu lived in this small building, so the door didn't need to be locked from the inside. She subconsciously thought that it was Xiao Zhu who came in, but when she looked up her expression froze. You're awake. I was afraid that you would be hungry at night, so I cooked a bowl of noodles for you. Li walked in with a tray and closed the door with his foot. When he heard her explanation, he was also stunned. After a long time, he asked tentatively, Why don't you put on your clothes first? I thought you had left. Wan Ruoqing put on her clothes, her cheeks still red. Well, it ended a little earlier than expected. I'll leave right away. Li put down the tray and couldn't help but turn his head to look at her. It was really strange. The new style of underwear had become completely popular in the capital, but whether it was Mississippi Lu, Zue Mo, or Ruoqing, they all had a special fondness for doo-doo. It really didn't make sense. Did you cook it? Wan Ruoqing looked at the fragrant noodles on the table. In addition to a few green decorations on top of the noodles, there was also a poached egg. She turned to look at him and asked, There is no kitchen here. I went outside deliberately. Li looked at her, shook his head, and said, Although it's not good to eat so late, it's my birthday after all. I still have to eat longevity noodles. Wan Ruoqing looked at him and said in a daze, Birthday? Li asked helplessly. Your birthday is only half a month later than Zue Mo's. Don't tell me you've forgotten it yourself? Her face was a little red. She sat at the table and ate the noodles. Li walked over and opened the window. In the distant night sky, the first light bloomed. Then there were 2, 10, 100 and countless. Wan Ruoqing held her chopsticks and looked out of the window absent-mindedly. The fireworks illuminated half of the sky. On the street not far from the window, there were countless exclamations. From her direction, he stood at the place where the fireworks were the most brilliant, smiling and waving at her. Li didn't stay out all night. If he really had a long talk with Ruoqing all night, it was very likely that Mississippi Lu would come over in the middle of the night to ask him to go back for dinner. What's more, in the next few days, Ruoqing would be very busy and needed enough time to rest. At the very least, it was not good for a man and a woman to be alone in a room. If it was spread out, it would ruin the girl's reputation. If she couldn't get married in the future, it would be great. Even so, when he returned home, it was after midnight. There was no light in the whole house. Rui and the child should have fallen asleep long ago. He groped his way to the study, but he didn't turn on the light. He walked to the bed, lay down, and slept in his clothes. When he stretched out his hand to pull the quilt, his palm touched a very soft place. He subconsciously squeezed it, and a cold voice seemed to ring in his ear. Take your hand away. It didn't seem like it, but it was. Li turned over and got out of bed. Looking at Mississippi Lu who sat up on the bed, he said in surprise, Why are you sleeping here? When he asked this question, he realized that he had asked a nonsense question. Recently, Mississippi Lu had abandoned martial arts for literature. She studied hard every day and even occupied his study. Most of the time, she read until late at night. It was not a difficult thing to understand that she slept here at night. A tiger's butt should not be touched, let alone a tigress' butt. Li hid the hand behind his back and took a few steps back, always alert for sword light beside the bed. When he retreated to the door, he saw that there was no movement beside the bed. He thought for a while and asked again, "If I go to sleep now, I will definitely disturb the child. The guest room is not cleaned. If you sleep here, where should I sleep? Your room?" Finally, there was some movement beside the bed. Mississippi Lou got out of bed. Although Lee could feel two eyes in the dark, which made him feel guilty, Mississippi Lou didn't mention what had happened just now. She walked straight past him and left the study. He closed the door and went back to the bed to lie down. A familiar light fragrance lingered in his nose. After being stunned for a while, he murmured, "Is there a difference?" Since the capital entered summer, the weather became hot and dry, and the situation was also restless. In the court, the two forces led by Grand Tutor Chu and Prime Minister Qin had new changes every day. The common people were also affected a lot. Rumors were everywhere. However, County Marquis Li, who was at the heart of the struggle, was as still as a mountain from beginning to end. He didn't make any response or reaction to it, which made everyone puzzled. Of course, although this matter affected the hearts of the common people, the affairs of the court and the debate between loyalty and treachery were too far away from them. It was not an easy choice to believe in the famous Grand Tutor Chu, or Lord Li, who had done a lot of good things for the common people. Compared with this matter, the new play that had been promoted in the brothel since a few days ago was obviously much closer to them. That new play had a trial screening in only one brothel in the capital today. Even if the brothel was already full of people, the guests who didn't buy tickets in advance could only stand outside the door and sigh. The spectators who were lucky enough to buy tickets were naturally complacent. In the dark theater, only the lights around the stage were on. They didn't wait long. The stage curtain was opened, and a faintly discernible voice floated into their ears. "Flowers will bloom again, but people will never be young again. There is no need to be rich and powerful. Peace and happiness are immortals." The curtain was completely opened, and an old woman in cotton clothes with a bent body appeared on the stage. Chapter 897. At the beginning of the play, there was a cliffhanger. Do Tianzhong, a Xiuzai in Chuzhou City, owed Granny Kai 40 taels of silver, so he had to sell his 7-year-old daughter, Do Yi, to Granny Kai as a child bride. Do Tianzhong received 10 taels of silver from Granny Kai for traveling expenses, and then went to the capital city to take the exam. There were not many highlights in this cliffhanger, but the actors on the stage were excellent, and the plot was smooth. It was quite enjoyable to watch, so the audience was not disappointed. That little Duanyan is quite good at acting at such a young age. You don't know. They have been trained in this field since they were young. Since they can go on the stage, you can't find any fault with them. That's true. But since this play is called Do Yi's Injustice, I don't know what the injustice is. What's the hurry? It's just the beginning. Let's keep watching. Because of the popularity of the Justice Bao series, people were very fond of this kind of drama. Who wouldn't like to redress the grievances of the people? Soon, they found out why Do Yi had been wronged. The Kai family moved. Do Yi's husband died early, and she and her mother-in-law depended on each other. Then they were framed by evil people and happened to meet a corrupt official. Do Yi had no choice but to confess and admit the crime in order to save her mother-in-law from being tortured. She was sentenced to death and sent to the execution ground. According to the usual practice of the play, this was the most exciting part of the play. This corrupt official deserves to die. This daughter-in-law is so filial. She is willing to bear the injustice in order to save her mother-in-law. Where is Lord Bao? Why isn't he here? Quickly reverse the verdict for Do Yi. Have you ever seen a play before? How could Lord Bao show up at this time? It was Guard John who descended from the sky and shouted, "Spare her life." Finally, someone couldn't help but remind them. "Brothers, are you two acting? Really? Isn't that Justice Bao?" Back to the stage. Do Yi had been sent to the execution ground. Two voices rang in the audience's ears, like a huge bell. Breaking the law for no reason, not being on guard against being punished by the Constitution, the cry was earth-shattering. In an instant, wandering souls went to the Sunluo Temple. How could they not blame the heaven and earth? Good people suffer poverty and have a shorter life, while evil people enjoy wealth and have a longer life. Heaven and earth. He acted as if he was afraid of the strong and bullied the weak, but it turned out that this was also how he pushed the boat with the current. You're the earth, yet you can't tell good from bad. Heaven, you are wrong to judge the virtuous and foolish to be heaven. As soon as these two sentences were spoken, everyone's hearts immediately sank. They seemed to feel that the injustice Doi had suffered had reached the point where even heaven and earth resented her. At this time the executioner said, "Death is at hand. What else do you have to say?" Doi said, "I want a clean banquet. When I Doi stand up, I want zhang, 2 white ropes to hang on the spear. If I Doi am really wronged, my head will fall wherever the knife passes. My hot blood will not stain the ground. It will all fly to the white silk. Now is the hottest time of the year. If Doi is really wronged, after she dies, 3 feet of auspicious snow will fall from the sky and cover her corpse. I Doi died a wrong death. From now on, Chuzhou City will suffer from drought for 3 years." Doi's voice was sorrowful as she made 3 wishes in a row. Blood stains the white silk, blood splatters in June, 3 years of drought. The crowd was silent, and no one was talking anymore. The executioner shouted angrily, "The time has come, execute her." In the middle of the stage, the executioner swung the knife down, and Doi fell to the ground. Her blood sprayed into the air and splashed on the white silk. At this moment, more than half of the people in the audience couldn't help but stand up. Blood stains on the white silk. It was indeed blood stains on the white silk. Doi's first wish had come true. On the stage, the executioner quietly made a hand gesture, and a board rose up from where a piece of the stage was missing, and the stage became seamless again. Right at this moment, someone below suddenly shivered and murmured, "Why do I feel that the surroundings are chilly?" Someone couldn't help but wrap his arms around himself. Although the weather was hot, there were ice mirrors everywhere. Even if it wasn't hot, it wouldn't be cold. Someone suddenly felt a chill in his nose, and he couldn't help but touch his nose, only to find that it was wet. When he raised his head, he discovered that there were actually white snowflakes falling from the sky. Is it snowing? How is that possible? It's summer now and we are in a brothel. Above everyone's heads on the thick beam, someone was standing there, gently shaking the bamboo basket in his hand, and extremely fine ice shards were scattered down from above. When everyone looked back to the stage, Doi's body had already been buried under the snow. As the tragic music became clearer, the lines of the opera surfaced in everyone's mind. I don't want half a star of blood spilled in the mortal world. It's all in the air. If I have a heart full of resentment, I will feel the 6 ice flowers roll like a brocade, so that my body won't be revealed. I Doi died an unjust death. From now on, Chuzhou City will suffer a drought for 3 years. This time, there was no bodyguard Zhan, no justice Bao, and Doi was executed. The vows she made before her death were fulfilled one by one. Blood splashed on the white silk, and snow fell in June. According to common sense, this was impossible. Even heaven and earth were touched by her grievances, and her wish was fulfilled. 3 years later, Doi's father, Do Tianzong, would reverse the verdict for her and clear her name. However, at this moment, the atmosphere in the brothel was getting out of control. On the stage, the performers who were about to start their performance had no choice but to stop. Below the stage, many people stared at the stage in a daze, and many had tears streaming down their cheeks. Doi was unfortunate, and she was miserable. However, only a few of those who could sit and watch the show were from rich families. Their status was not much higher than Doi's, and they were also bullied by all kinds of evil forces. This was Doi's injustice, and it was also their injustice. The show could no longer go on, so the manager of the brothel announced that the last twist of Doi's injustice would be postponed. When the audience walked out of the brothel, they felt that the scorching sun was not as hot as it used to be. Instead, they felt a chill down their spines. They were sweating, but it was cold sweat. What's wrong with you guys? Is the show over? Was it good? What's going on? Say something. The audience couldn't get any useful information from the people who had already walked out of the brothel. By then, the second show was about to begin, so they didn't have time to ask the audience questions. After a long time, the second group of people walked out of the brothel. An unjust case shocked the world, and snow fell in June. In just a few days, the play known as the greatest injustice of all time had spread across the capital. All the other shows in the dozens of brothels in the capital had temporarily stopped, and only Do-E's injustice was being rehearsed in every brothel. In the county government of the capital, County Magistrate Lu looked at the thick stack of papers in front of him and suddenly felt dizzy. He slumped in his chair and murmured, "How can there be so many unjust cases in the capital, right under the feet of the emperor?" Below, Arrestor Zhao showed a wry smile and said, "Lord Lu, don't complain. These days, it's the same everywhere in the county government. Chuzhou is our neighbor. The governor of Chuzhou and the magistrate of Shanyang County have been scolded badly. The people of the capital are filled with righteous indignation. Some people are even kneeling at the gate of the palace, begging the princess to investigate the case thoroughly and prove Do-E's innocence. This is just a play." County Magistrate Lu slammed the table angrily and said loudly, "But there are so many unjust cases. How can I investigate? Sir, this is really nothing. Think about it this way. In the play, if it wasn't the magistrate of Shanyang County, but the magistrate of the capital—" "Shut up." County Magistrate Lu's face turned pale, and his whole body quivered. He suddenly bounced up from the chair and shouted, "Beat the drum, raise the court. I'm going to break 10 today." On the street in the capital, a man looked at the woman next to him and said pitifully, "My wife, believe me, I really lost my purse. I didn't keep a vixen outside." The woman said angrily with a face full of disbelief, "How dare you deny it? You have the smell of her perfume on you. Do you think I can't smell it?" The man helplessly took out a bottle of perfume from his pocket and said, "This is the birthday gift I bought for you with the money I saved for a year." He said with a sad face, "How dare you suspect me of keeping a vixen outside? I am more innocent than Do-E." "What? You have a secret stash of money?" At the corner of the street, a woman chased after an 8 or 9-year-old child and said angrily, "You didn't go to school today, did you go to the brothel?" The child stopped and shook his head. "I didn't. You are wrongly accusing me." The woman grabbed his arm. "How dare you lie to me? The teacher in school told me everything." "I really didn't." The child shook his head violently and said loudly, "Mother, you are wrongly accusing me. If I die of being wrongly accused, I will make my blood splash on the brothel, snow in June, and drought for 3 years in the capital. You are still denying it." The woman took off his pants on the street and slapped him a few times, saying as she slapped him, "I will make your blood splash on the brothel, snow in June, and drought for 3 years." Recently, there was a wind of crying injustice in the capital. Everyone, regardless of gender or age, called themselves Do-E. When the brothel performed for free, there were even no pedestrians on the usually crowded streets. In addition, the government offices in each county were blocked by the people who appealed every day. The situation did not improve until the government suppressed several groups of troublemakers with a tough attitude. At this time, in front of the government office of the Ministry of Justice, a weak woman walked out of the crowd. After beating the big drum at the entrance of the government office, she knelt in front of the door and cried out in a sad voice, "Sir, I am wrongly accused." Chapter 898. Sir, I've been wronged. The woman knelt in front of the Ministry of Justice. Her voice was extremely sorrowful, as if she had a great grievance in her heart that she had nowhere to cry about. It drew the sidelong glances of passers-by. Recently, the common people had been filing complaints. It wasn't just the yamen of the various counties, but also the yamen of the capital, the imperial censorate, the Ministry of Justice, and even the Ministry of Revenue, Ministry of Rights, and Ministry of Works. As long as it was a yamen, it was unavoidable. After all, the number of yamens was limited, and there were many people. It was impossible for them all to gather together. Even if all the yamens in Jingdo were taken into account, there wouldn't be enough. This kind of situation had greatly hindered the normal operation of the yamen. Thus, The eldest princess quickly made an order based on the feelings of the people and the actual situation in Jingdo. Anyone who took the opportunity to purposely cause trouble and block the yamen would be severely punished as a warning to others. If there were truly any grievances, they should be filed in an orderly manner. The relevant yamen would deal with them one by one according to the urgency and severity of the case. Any grievances had to be tried, and any cases had to be reversed. The bottom line of the law was strictly observed, and the people were given a clear sky. With the eldest princess order, the vigorous anti-corruption cases among the people were temporarily eased. It didn't disappear. Instead, it went from disorder to order. Countless eyes were fixed on the various yamens in Jingdo. At this critical juncture, even the usually unbridled playboys in Jingdo were tightly restrained by their families. They were terrified that they would cause trouble and become targets in everyone's eyes. Even a small matter would be infinitely magnified to a point where their families couldn't bear it. The Ministry of Justice usually dealt with serious cases. Unless the emperor designated it, the main hall of the Ministry of Justice was usually closed, and complaints of grievances were not allowed in front of the Ministry of Justice. However, this time was different. Each county yamen was about to go crazy, and the Ministry of Justice couldn't be idle either. A bailiff had already come out from inside and kindly helped the woman up from the ground. He kindly asked her what grievances she had suffered, and if she had a piece of paper. If she didn't, she could have a bailiff from the Ministry of Justice write one for free. From beginning to end, there wasn't much impatience on their faces. So many people were watching on the street. If one place wasn't handled well, the Ministry of Justice's reputation would be ruined. This was a special time. If something went wrong at this time, it would be strange if the minister didn't skin them alive. Soon, the woman was helped into the hall by a Ministry of Justice runner. Among the onlookers on the street, someone shook his head and said, "In terms of how they treat the common people, the officials of the Ministry of Justice are still the best. Unlike the governor's mansion, I heard that some time ago, someone went to the yamen to seek justice, but the people of the yamen didn't care. They even locked the person up for disturbing the yamen. Compared to the Ministry of Justice, the difference is obvious." "That's right." As soon as he finished speaking, someone else chimed in. "Unfortunately, I was also present at that time. It is said that the young lady's younger sister died. This is a murder case. The people at the capital's magistrate's office are really too careless. I heard that the young lady has been arrested several times. What is the capital magistrate worried about?" Another person interrupted. "The one who went in just now seems to be the young lady. Why is she in the Ministry of Justice this time? There's such a thing." Someone's face was filled with anger as he quickly walked towards the entrance of the Ministry of Justice. "If that's the case, I might have to take a look at this case. I'm going too. Let's go together." At the entrance of the Ministry of Justice, the excited crowd was stopped by the yamen officials. However, they didn't stop them for long. After verifying their identities, someone specially led them in. Based on the principle of fairness and openness, when the Ministry of Justice was conducting a case, the common people were allowed to listen in. The Ministry of Justice claimed that there were laws to abide by, that the law was enforced strictly, and that those who violated the law would be punished. For some cases, the process of handling the case was completely transparent, which won many people's hearts. Of course, in order not to disturb the order of the case, the number of people listening in was still limited to 50. However, although most people couldn't see it with their own eyes, the various details of the case would be passed on through the mouths of these 50 people. In a short period of time, the news would spread throughout the entire capital. In the court, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yi, patted the gavel and asked, "Who are you? Where do you live? What are your grievances? Tell me slowly." The woman stood in the court and said softly, "Your Excellency, my name is Lin Qin. I live near the city gate of the capital. My younger sister is 16 years old. Her maiden name is Lin Shuangshuang. She used to be a musician at the Miaoying Pavilion. On the night of the 15th of the first month, today's court will be held by Lu Qingtian. This lady is really lucky this time. Every case handled by Lu Qingtian has been solved by him. Not necessarily. It's very likely that the capital governor's residence will be involved in this case. However, I still believe in Lu Qingtian. In the past few years, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yi, had handled countless cases. No matter how well hidden the criminal was, there was no place for him to hide. This was because he often helped the people and solved ordinary cases. He was deeply loved and respected by the people of the capital. People gave him the nickname of Lu Qingtian. Lu Qingtian had the meaning of the Great Lord of Justice. It also overlapped with the fictional image of Justice Bao in the opera. This was the highest praise the people of the capital had for him. Inside the court, when the woman was complaining about her grievances, people outside the court had already understood. So this woman is Miss Shuangshuang's sister. Miss Shuangshuang's zither skills were unparalleled. It's a pity that she died young. That 100 birds pay homage to the phoenix will never be heard again. What a pity, what a pity. Didn't the capital governor's office say that it was the work of a criminal from the imperial court? Bullshit capital governor's office. One of the people who had been paying attention to the situation inside the court was so angry that his chest heaved up and down. He angrily said, "Listen, this lady only wanted to see Miss Shuangshuang's body, but the capital governor's office found a reason to arrest her. Later on, they used a few more reasons to lock her up in prison for almost half a year. If there's nothing fishy going on, I won't believe it even if I beat you to death." At this time, as the woman in the court explained, the case gradually became clear. According to the explanation given by the capital governor's office, on the night of the Upper Yuan dynasty, a criminal from the imperial court hid in the Fine Sound Pavilion. After using extremely cruel methods to kill Miss Shuangshuang, he tried to harm the young master of the Chu family but failed. Then he jumped out of the window and escaped. Even now, although the wanted poster had been posted everywhere, the criminal had not been arrested. If it weren't for the lady standing in the court, perhaps the case would have passed with the passage of time and be forgotten by people. However, her experience and the actions of the capital governor's office added many points of doubt to the case. How did Miss Shuangshuang die? How did the criminal escape the heavy pursuit of the government without leaving a single trace? What role did the capital governor's office play in this case? The entire case suddenly became complicated and confusing. Everyone said that Doi was wronged. This lady's younger sister had died a dubious death. She went to the government to seek redress and was imprisoned for half a year. She had no place to seek redress for her grievances. So how could she not be wronged? Once the case broke out, it quickly attracted the attention of the people of the capital. It also made the Ministry of Justice pay great attention to it. The relevant witnesses of the Fine Sound Pavilion had already been brought to the Ministry of Justice and were heavily protected. The Ministry of Justice had also sent in a request to pull out all the files related to the case from the capital governor's office and reinvestigate the case. They wanted to prove the innocence of the deceased and give the people who were paying attention to the case an explanation. Under these circumstances, Doi's injustice continued to be performed in various brothels in the capital. Every day, countless benefit performances were held. In a certain brothel, Fong looked at Li Yi and said with some heartache, "Young master, this stage, this scene, this effect, so much ice, and only so little ticket money, and so many benefit performances. This time we've suffered a great loss." Li Yi shook his head and looked at him. With sincere and heartfelt words he said, "Don't always think about money. You also have to think about contributing to society." Chapter 899. People should look forward to the future, but they couldn't always focus on money. Fong had never been an educated man, so it was normal that he couldn't keep up with the times. Therefore, it was necessary to help him establish a correct outlook on life and values. For example, money could never be used up. When the time was right, he should give back to the society by helping the people perform for free, so that they could enjoy a 5D movie experience. Although he would lose money, he would be giving back to the society, which would help him realize his self-worth. Looking at his confused face, Chun Fan knew that he didn't understand. But this was not a big deal. The current Old Feng's state of mind was much higher than before. He did good deeds without leaving his name, risked his life, and used his private money to support a single girl for 3 years without asking for anything in return. Even in this era where people's hearts were not so fickle, it was still very rare. This world doesn't give the poor a chance to live. Earth, you don't know what's good for you. Heaven, you don't know what's good for you. I don't want to shed even half a star of blood in the mortal world. If I have a stomach full of resentment, I will feel the 6 ice flowers rolling like a brocade, so that my body won't be exposed. From now on, the Chuzhou city will suffer from 3 years of drought. Inside the brothel, someone would stand up and shout from time to time. This was a typical example of someone who was too engrossed in the scene and placed himself in it. There was no need for the staff of the brothel to remind them at all. Someone beside them would press them down, so that they wouldn't spoil everyone's interest. In another brothel, in a remote corner, the man handed a handkerchief to the middle-aged man next to him and sighed. "Lord Five, wipe your tears." The middle-aged man wiped his tears and heaved a sigh. "Well done. It's a good performance." The burly man nodded. If he didn't know that this was a play, he would have rushed up and punched that dog official to death with 3 punches, when blood was splashed on the white rope, and snow was flying in the 6th month of June. The middle-aged man stared at the stage and murmured, "Dou-Yi's grievances could be redressed, but I wonder how many more people's grievances are still buried in the darkness." The burly man shook his head and said, "The imperial court is already vigorously investigating the unjust and false cases. Those filthy and ugly fellows hiding in the dark will one day be dragged out and exposed to the sun." The middle-aged man nodded. "Yes, the sun is about to rise. How could it be? How could she sue the Ministry of Justice?" Cui Qingming's face was filled with rage. The teacup in his hand fell to the ground, and the tea splashed everywhere. He gasped for breath and loudly said, "Last time, we have already lost an assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. Now, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yiji, is only following that person's orders. That woman is still in prison. How could such a thing happen? She caused trouble twice a few days ago, and has already attracted the attention of some people. Without a reason, we can't keep her in prison forever." Sing Shichen shook his head and said, "I thought she would be more obedient after being locked up for so long. Who would have thought that as soon as she went out, the people following her were not paying attention, and made her kneel in front of the Ministry of Justice?" Cui Qingming returned to his seat, and calmed down for a while. Then he said in a deep voice, "I will take care of this case. Otherwise, if it really gets investigated, not to mention Xu Ping, even you, the capital governor, will not be able to protect yourself." As soon as he finished speaking, a runner came in to report that the Ministry of Justice had arrived. Cui Qingming suddenly stood up from his seat, his face full of shock. How could it be so fast? The case of Miss Shuang of the wonderful Sound Pavilion quickly had new developments. The case file of the capital governor's office that had accepted the case was full of loopholes and could not withstand scrutiny. The coroner who had examined the corpse also revealed the truth under the interrogation of the Ministry of Justice. That night, Miss Shuang was not killed by the criminal. Instead, she was tortured and humiliated to death. As for why the murderer was said to be the criminal who might not have appeared, they would have to ask the young master of the Chu family, who was in the same room as Miss Shuang. The Cui family, a middle-aged man, slammed the table and said angrily, "How could there be such a big oversight? Does Sing Shichen not have a brain? Doesn't he know what time it is?" Then, a suspicious expression appeared on his face and he muttered, "Could it be Sing Shichen? What good does this do for him?" Cui Qingming shook his head and said, "This case has attracted the attention of the court and the people. If it is found out, not only will he lose his position as the capital governor, but he will also lose his official position." The middle-aged man revealed a defeated expression. "That Lu Yi is a ruthless character. It is said that there is no case that he cannot solve. This time, I'm afraid that the Chu family, one capital governor, we." Cui Qingming clenched his fists and asked through gritted teeth, What's the situation with the Chu family? The middle-aged man shook his head and said, The Ministry of Justice has not summoned Chu Ping for the time being. But it should be soon. In that place, no matter how tight-lipped one is, it is inevitable. What about that matter? The people no longer trust the Chu family. Even those great scholars do not dare to risk universal condemnation and speak casually. After all, this case has too many implications, and the situation is not optimistic. Cui Qingming thought for a long time and loosened his fists. He slowly said, The Chu family can't be saved, but the capital governor may not. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment, then asked, Will we also be dragged into this matter? Cui Qingming shook his head and said, Seng Shichen is a smart man. He knows what to do. The Ministry of Justice investigated cases very quickly, and this case was extremely fast. They had no choice but to act quickly. The entire capital was watching the progress of the case, so they did not dare to delay. And this case was actually not complicated. There was no need to summon the grandson of the Grand Tutor. The several bailiffs of the capital government who knew about the case confessed everything not long after they were brought to the Ministry of Justice. They had indeed been pursuing a criminal that day, but the criminal had not been in the Fine Sound Pavilion. They had accidentally stumbled upon young Master Chu's deed, only to discover to their shock that young Master Chu, who liked to play tricks, had accidentally strangled the young lady to death. What happened next was logical. The Chu family was a famous noble family in the capital. How could they tolerate such a stain on a member of their family? Naturally, they used the power of the family to cover up this matter. Thus, the cause of Lady Shuang's death became a crime committed by a fugitive. The young master of the Chu family, who was originally the murderer, suddenly became the victim. In order to cover up the truth, they quickly disposed of Lady Shuang's body. When Lady Shuang's sister went to the Yamen to complain, they were afraid that the matter would be exposed, so they also arrested her and threw her into prison, adding insult to injury. This was simply insane. The injustice of Dou Yi was just a play and could not be taken seriously, but Lady Shuang's grievance had really happened right beside them. They had heard it with their own ears, seen it with their own eyes, and had always been paying attention. And during the course of the trial, the bailiffs of the capital government revealed another secret that further solidified Chu Ping's crime. Not long ago, the disappearance of a girl that had caused an uproar actually also had the shadow of this young master of the Chu family. However, this matter was still concealed by the all-powerful Chu family. It was precisely because of this young master of the Chu family's perverted hobby that Lady Shuang had died a wrongful death. Lady Shuang must have been forced by that beast. No wonder it snowed on the night of the Lantern Festival. I originally thought that it was a strange phenomenon that happened once every few decades, but it turns out that the heavens were crying out for Lady Shuang's injustice. To think that I had always thought that the Chu family was the backbone of our Jing kingdom, that Grand Tutor Chu was a just and righteous person. But who would have thought? He still has the cheek to say that Lord Li is a sycophant? What has Lord Li done? He has made great contributions to the country and the people, but he is not the least bit proud of it. He has even repeatedly resigned from his position and refused to be rewarded. And what about him? He covered up for his descendant, causing such a huge injustice. How can he still be called a scholar? He even wants to frame Lord Li, the pillar of our Jing kingdom. If not for Prime Minister Qin and the other officials in the imperial court, I'm afraid. Sycophant. This is a true sycophant. Old and undying, a great traitor to the country. In the court, Lu Qingtian slammed the gavel. Summon Chu Ping. A few bailiffs quickly walked out of the main gate and headed towards the Chu family. At first, there were only a few people following behind them. Soon it became 10, then 100. After passing through an alley, the crowd behind them could no longer be seen. Chapter 900. The Chu family. Is this real or not? Grand Tutor. What should we do? The public's discontent is already boiling outside. They're coming here. Several elders paced back and forth in the hall with anxious expressions on their faces. Because of the Fine Sound Pavilion murder case, the Chu family had already been pushed to the heart of the struggle. As the case progressed, although most of the officials could still maintain their calm, due to the prestige of the Grand Tutor, the common people of the capital had already lost trust in the Chu family and the elders. Yesterday, a rather famous scholar had been smashed in the head with a rock for merely saying, "A sycophant harming the country," against County Marquis Lee. His body was covered in rotten leaves, and he was in an extremely sorry state. When he returned home, even the walls of the courtyard had been pushed down. The cause of all this was the Chu family. The Chu family had won the hearts of the people, but they had also lost the hearts of the people. The old man before them was just an ordinary old man. Grand Tutor Chu sat in a chair with a calm expression. It was impossible to tell what was on his face. He only stared blankly at the door as if in thought, but his eyes were empty. A servant of the Chu family ran in a panic and shouted, "The Ministry of Justice is here!" Several constables walked in and slowly bowed to the old man in the chair. The one in the lead said, "Lord Grand Tutor, we suspect that your grandson is related to a serious case. Please come with us, young Master Chu." A middle-aged man rushed out from the side and shouted, "You think you can take Ping-er away just because you suspect him?" The constable took out an item from his sleeve and handed it over. He bowed and said, "Lord Chu, this is a warrant from the Ministry of Justice. Please take a look." The middle-aged man didn't even look at the warrant. He said coldly, "How can a member of the Chu family be taken away so easily by the Ministry of Justice? Without His Majesty's imperial edict, I'd like to see who dares to act recklessly in the Chu family." The constable's face showed some difficulty when he heard this. This was the Chu family. The Chu family was different from other family clans. With Grand Tutor Chu present, even the members of the Ministry of Justice could not act too brazenly. Of course, if the Chu family was reasonable, things would naturally go smoothly. If they insisted, they would probably have to seek His Majesty's decree. The constable looked at him and bowed. "If that's the case, we'll take our leave first." After the bailiffs left, the middle-aged man quickly walked up to Grand Tutor Chu and said loudly, "Father, are you going to watch as they take Ping-er away? Qinwen is right. The change of dynasties, the rise and fall of clans, these are all fated. How can there be a dynasty that can last for thousands of generations?" His hand covered Li Duan's ears, but a hint of melancholy and pity appeared on his face. At this moment, whether inside or outside the capital, no matter what they were doing, almost everyone stopped what they were doing and raised their heads to look at the sky. In the sky, there were birds fleeing in all directions in fright. Hand over Chu Ping! Hand over Chu Ping! The Chu family. The tightly shut doors slowly opened. Everyone was about to rush in when they saw the old man with the cane in front of them. They could not help but take a few steps back. The deafening sounds also gradually quieted down. "All of this is my fault." Grand Tutor Chu handed his cane to the servant next to him and slowly knelt in front of the crowd. In a hoarse voice he said, "I have let down that lady, let down the ancestors of the Chu family, and let down the people of the world. Grandfather, get up. This is not your fault." After a sigh, a figure limped out from the crowd at the back. He walked in front of Grand Tutor Chu and carefully helped him up. He smiled and said, "It's not a good feeling to kneel. You're already so old. Kneeling like this will hurt your legs." Two servants of the Chu family hurriedly helped Grand Tutor Chu. Chu Ping did not even look at the crowd discussing outside the door. He slowly knelt in front of Grand Tutor Chu and heavily kowtowed. "I didn't mean to kill Lady Shuangshuang. However, it's no longer important to say these things now. You've brought me to so many places in the past, seen so many sceneries, and met so many people. I'm really grateful to you." Chu Ping kowtowed again. As he stood up, he said, "Everyone says the capital is good. In the past, when I was outside, I always thought about coming back. Only after coming back did I realize that the capital is actually the most boring place. Thank you. I'm sorry." He stood up and apologized to Grand Tutor Chu. He turned to face the vast crowd outside the Chu family and said loudly, "Everything that I Chu Ping have done is my own doing. It has nothing to do with the Chu family. Thud, 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 thud. He knelt down on both knees and heavily kowtowed 3 times to the crowd. After the 3 kowtows, there was no more sound. He knelt there silently. The constable closest to him seemed to have thought of something. He took a step forward and gently pushed him. Chu Ping's body fell sideways. A dagger was stabbed straight into his chest. Fresh blood stained his clothes. The Chu family's former glory was gone, and no one ever mentioned the title of the scholarly bones of the Jing kingdom. Under the heavy punishment of the court, although the Chu manor was still preserved and the property was not confiscated, the people of Jingdo never saw the tightly closed front door of the Chu family open again. None of the great scholars who had once stood with Grand Tutor Chu said anything about this matter. In reality, it wasn't that they didn't say anything. In the beginning, there were some who spoke out, but before the court could react, they all disappeared because of the public opinion. Chu Ping died and the truth came to light. Lady Shuangshuang's injustice was cleared. The court felt wronged and set up a tomb for her in Jingdo for the people to worship. It also erected a warning monument for the government. The people would forever remember the name Shuangshuang. It was because of her death that the court paid attention to cases of injustice among the people and accelerated the reform of the law. It made the government truly a place to redress the grievances of the people, and not a filthy place where those important people abused their power for personal gain. In this process, there were also some things that happened that exceeded everyone's expectations. After the case was concluded, the capital governor Tseng Shichen, who was deeply involved in this case, was restored to his position. Although he was also fined 3 years of his salary, compared to the impact of this case and the Chu family's ending, it was really nothing. The reason was that Lady Shuangshuang's older sister was very protective of this Sir Tseng in court. Although she had been arrested and thrown into the Yaman's prison, from beginning to end, she had not been mistreated or treated unfairly. The Yaman's bailiffs had taken good care of her in prison. Even when she was able to walk to the Ministry of Justice, it was the Yaman's people who escorted her. This clearly didn't make sense. If Tseng Shichen really wanted to seal her mouth, then he should have silenced her as soon as possible. Why did he give her so much preferential treatment? Even when she was being tortured, he played it down and went through the motions. In reality, when a few clever people heard this, they had already figured out the whole story. This Sir Tseng had arrested her and thrown her into prison. It looked like he was persecuting her, but he was actually protecting her. This was because the Chu family's background was very deep. Grand Tutor Chu alone could unite many of the great scholars, and even half of the officials in court to slander a pillar of the court who had made a great contribution to this country. What was a capital governor to them? He couldn't resist the Chu family, so he could only use this method to protect the girl. Otherwise, Lady Shuangshuang's case would probably never be overturned. A loyal official became a sycophant, a clean stream became a dirty stream, an upright official became a treacherous official, and then became an upright official again. Just like these days in the capital, the storm rose and then calmed and then rose again. The injustice of Doi came to an end, and there was a new show in the brothel. The storm had calmed down a bit, and only a few ripples remained, enough to serve as a side dish for the people of the capital. You're talking about that sycophant. In a bun shop, a scholar in a scholarly robe had just spoken when a bun flew from the front and smashed into his face, followed by an angry voice. Who are you calling a sycophant? Say it again. The scholar picked up the bun that had fallen to the ground and looked at the shopkeeper of the bun shop. He said in a daze, I said that Grand Tutor Chu was a scholar, loved and respected by the people, and trusted by the officials. Who would have thought that he would do such a thing to ruin his reputation? It's really... The shopkeeper of the bun shop looked surprised. Ah, you mean that old sycophant? Who else could it be? The owner of the bun shop waved his hand and said awkwardly, Hi, I'm really sorry. I got addicted to smashing you scholars a while ago. It's fine. That bun is on me, it's free. The Chu family has now completely declined. No one in the capital is willing to have anything to do with them. After the reform of the law, the pressure on the government has increased a lot. Fortunately, after that period of busyness, the pressure has lessened a lot. Most cases are actually not that complicated. And it's not every day that there's a case of injustice. Without Grand Tutor Chu leading the way, that matter can be considered to have completely calmed down. Emmingsu looked at Li Yi and sighed. It's finally over. After a long time without receiving a response, she extended her hand and waved it in front of Li Yi's eyes. Li Yi came back to his senses and asked, "Ah, what did you just say?" Emmingsu looked at him and finally waved her hand. "Nothing. How is this the end?" Li Yi shook his head. He lifted the curtain of the carriage and said, "This is just the beginning." He jumped down from the carriage and walked towards a building in front of him. It was an ancestral hall. In the ancestral hall, there was a stone tablet. The people of the capital lined up like flowing water. After placing an incense stick in front of the stone tablet, they left through the other side. Li Yi lined up and placed an incense stick in front of the stone tablet. He then stood to the side for a while before walking out. Emmingsu was still standing next to the carriage, looking at another carriage. A green-clothed manservant walked over from that side. He bowed and said respectfully, "My master invites you over." Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Who is your master?" "You'll know when you get there, my lord." Li Yi looked at the carriage that was parked in the corner and walked towards it. As he walked to the side of the carriage, the curtain was lifted by a withered hand, revealing a face covered in wrinkles. The old man seemed to have aged another 10 years since the last time he had seen him. Li Yi cupped his hands and said, "Grand Tutor, long time no see." Behind the curtain, the old man looked at him emotionlessly and said in a hoarse voice, "You once asked me if it was worth it. For my own selfishness, I buried the entire Chu clan. It was indeed not worth it." He shook his head, his eyes suddenly becoming sharp. "But the eldest imperial son returning to the capital to inherit the throne is natural. Have you ever thought about what you are doing? What you are doing is worth it. Just what do you want?" He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Prince Jin is young, and you have no contact with the other princes. Tell me, just what do you want?" Li Yi looked at him and slowly asked, "Grand Tutor, do you really want to know?" Grand Tutor Chu said nothing, and only stared fixedly at him. Since Grand Tutor wants to know, Li Yi shook his head and walked into the carriage. Grand Tutor Chu leaned forward. He moved his head closer and whispered, "I won't tell you." Chapter 902. As the carriage drove past, there was a violent cough coming from inside. Emmingsu turned back to look at Li Yi. "What did you say to Grand Tutor?" Li Yi shook his head. "Nothing." Emmingsu looked at the carriage in front again. The coughing gradually faded away. She continued to look at him with a look that said, "Do you believe me?" "I swear on the honor of a sycophant." Li Yi raised 4 fingers. "I really didn't say anything to him. The main reason for the Chu family's demise was not the Cui family. Under normal circumstances, the 2 crimes that Chu Ping had committed, according to the previous laws of the Jing Kingdom, were nothing more than a high-class person killing a low-class person and having to pay some silver taels. Even Chu Ping himself might not be severely punished. The real reason was Grand Tutor Chu. From his inaction in the beginning, or his shielding, to his worsening later, Grand Tutor Chu could not turn back, nor could the Chu family. All of this was caused by Grand Tutor Chu, who cherished his reputation and was extremely famous. The Chu family rose because of its reputation and was also dragged down by it. It was a century-old family that had fallen to such a state. He had once asked Grand Tutor Chu whether it was worth it or not. Grand Tutor Chu did not answer, but gave the answer with his actions. But no matter what, this old man was once prominent and was still watched by countless people. If he was told that the king of Shu was not his majesty's biological son, and that he wanted Emmingsu to be the empress, Grand Tutor Chu might have a heart attack or a brain hemorrhage. If he was not careful, he would not be able to clear his name. The 2 did not get on the carriage again, but walked back. When they were about to walk past the ancestral hall, 2 figures walked toward them. The middle-aged man walking in front raised his head and was slightly stunned. He immediately cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Your Highness." "Greetings, Lordly." Emingzi turned back to look at Li Yi, the doubt in her eyes obvious. "Qin He, the fifth son of Prime Minister Qin." Li Yi explained to her, then looked at Fifth Master Qin, and pointed at his hair, his eyes full of doubt. "Oh, about that." Fifth Master Qin smiled and said, "I'm old, so I'm not like you young people." Li Yi nodded and then slightly cupped his hands. "Thank you, Prime Minister Qin, for dealing with the matters in the court recently. Please thank him on my behalf. I will personally visit him another day to thank him. My father is only doing what he thinks is right. We can't say anything." Fifth Master Qin shook his head and said, "However, I will convey Lord Li's message." Li Yi looked at the ancestral hall behind him and asked, "Did you also come to pay your respects to Lady Shuangshuang?" Fifth Master Qin nodded and said, "Although Lady Shuangshuang is no longer here, her death is meaningful." Solemnly he said, "Fifth Master, tell me, what do you want me to do this time?" "Go follow the little Duke, and see what he's been doing these days. I'm the best at following people." The burly man patted his chest. "With me doing things, Fifth Master can rest assured. The trail is broken." Li Yi sighed and said, "How could it be broken?" Lu Yi shook his head and said, "The Ministry of Justice and the Secret Intelligence Bureau couldn't find anything. The person behind this case must have great power in Jingdo." Li Yi rubbed the space between his brows, and suddenly felt a headache coming on. He tilted his head to look at the princess and said helplessly, "Now there's only the Cui family left. Why don't we choose another path?" Emingzi looked at him and asked in confusion, "What path?" "I know a path that leads directly to the central lake of the Academy of Mathematics. If we go at night, we'll definitely not be discovered. Why don't we take advantage of the darkness and wind? Sink the Cui family into the lake. You also think this is a good idea, right? It's simple, convenient, and saves time. Do you want me to help you kidnap Consort Cui out of the palace?" "If you can help, that would be great." Li Yi met her eyes. Lu Yi quickly looked out the window. A moment later, Li Yi shook his head and said, "Forget it. It's dark and I can't see the road clearly. Let's think about it at length. If the Cui family could be taken down so easily, father wouldn't have waited until now." Emingzi shook her head and said, 20 years ago, their power had already seeped into every corner of the imperial court. They also have a good reputation among the people. Although they are not as powerful as before, they still have a foundation that cannot be underestimated." Li Yi sighed and said, "That's why I said it's more convenient to choose another path." Fong strode in from outside and handed him an envelope. He said, "Young master, there's news from Wu Er." Li Yi opened the envelope and looked at it. He handed it to Lu Yi and said with a smile, "Isn't it connected now?" Chapter 903. Li Yi handed the letter to Lu Yishui and said, "Keep an eye on Qinyu. You should be able to find something." Lu Yishui took the letter and looked at it. He nodded and said, "I understand." Emingzi seemed to understand what he wanted to do. When she walked into the courtyard, she turned around and asked, "Are you going to deal with the Cui family the same way you dealt with the Chu family?" "The Cui family has many henchmen. They won't do many things themselves. As long as the matter of the king of Shu is not exposed, unless the Cui family is plotting a rebellion, it won't have much impact on the general situation." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Let's take one step at a time. A dam of 1,000 miles will collapse because of an ant's nest. If we add up all the things one by one, it might be the last straw that breaks the camel's back." Mingzhu's tone was firm. "We can't let father know about that matter no matter what." "Of course I know that. Otherwise, the Cui family will die countless times for this crime." Li Yi had thought about this contradiction many times. It was obvious that it was easy to destroy the Cui family through that matter. But it was easier to destroy the old emperor. They couldn't take this risk. The two reached a tacit understanding on this matter. There was nothing to discuss. Li Yi saw Mississippi Lu on the other side of the courtyard. She seemed to have just finished practicing. He thought for a moment and waved his hand. "Rui, come here for a moment." Mississippi Lou put down autumn water and walked over. She cast an inquiring look at him. Lee looked at the two standing together. After a moment, he looked at Mississippi Lou and said in surprise, "I find that you have been growing recently. I remember that you were shorter than the princess at the beginning. Now you are the same height." Mississippi Lou looked at him. "When have I ever been shorter than her?" "I didn't?" Lee shook his head and said, "Then I must have remembered wrongly again. I don't know what happened to my memory recently." Lee walked the princess out the door and saw sister-in-law Fong walking over from afar. When he saw the person beside her, he was instantly stunned. He closed his eyes in disbelief, and when he opened them again, sister-in-law Fong was already talking to the woman beside her with a smile. Lee looked back at Mississippi Lou and asked, "Who's the girl next to Mrs. Fong? I've never seen her before." Mississippi Lou looked in that direction and said, "Yesterday, when Aunt Fong went to the temple to offer incense, she met Miss Xiao on the road. Miss Xiao came to the capital to seek shelter with her relatives, but she couldn't find her and was robbed of her traveling expenses. Aunt Fong pitied her and temporarily took her in." "Miss Xiao." Lee nodded and sighed. "Sister-in-law Fong is really kind. Sister-in-law Fong actually treats people very well, and Uncle Fong is also not bad." After a moment, he dipped his finger in the tea and wrote 2 words on the table. Soon he crossed out the 2 words Prince Jean on the stone table. In the situation where His Majesty still had adult princes, the possibility of a child inheriting the throne was too small. For the sake of the overall situation, His Majesty would not make such a choice. On this point, Li definitely knew better than he did. As for the other princes, whether it was status or talent, they were far inferior. More importantly, those princes were far away in their fiefdoms, and Li Yi had no contact with them. Apart from Prince Jean, among the princes, there was not a single one who had both a high status and a close relationship with him. However, he had a close relationship with the princesses. She had offended the king of Shu for Princess Yongning, causing the Cui family to see him as a thorn in their side. Princess Shaning was also very close to him, and there was no barrier when they got along. As for the eldest princess, needless to say, it was said that they were close friends when they were in Qing'an Prefecture. In the past few years in the capital, the eldest princess established the Women's College and the Women's Union. She was deeply loved by the women in the capital and founded the academy, which won the hearts of the scholars in the world. Ever since she took over the government, all the civil and military officials in the court would praise the eldest princess when they mentioned her. There were countless officials in the court who were as loyal to her as they were to His Majesty, who would still dare to treat her as a woman. Not to mention, great scholar Chu's actions backfired, and he lost the hearts of the people. Her Highness reformed the law, which was also applauded by the people. Behind all these things, there was actually his shadow. It was strange that he didn't know what he was thinking. Instead of supporting a prince, he spared no effort to do these things for the eldest princess. What was he thinking? Sing Shichen picked up the teacup and put it down again, the expression on his face frozen. Chapter 904. In the room, Madame Chen was teaching drunken ink embroidery. For the daughters of the noble families in the capital city, embroidery was a necessary skill. Most of them would embroider their wedding dresses with their own hands before they got married. Seeing Li Yi come in, she quickly hid the wedding dress. Li Yi didn't know what she was thinking. She actually looked at the wedding dress more secretively than the belly band. He had even seen her wearing the belly band several times, but she didn't even show him a wedding dress that wasn't embroidered. Madame Chen put their hands together and said, "You too, it's time to pick a day and set the date early. You can't keep dragging it on like this." It's still early." Drunken Ink lowered her head and whispered. Li glanced at her and said, "What do you mean it's still early? It's not early." Watching her break free from his hand and run out quickly, Li shook his head helplessly. Although she usually looked very bold, after the two of them got closer, she became shy. Third Miss Chen looked at her running out with a smile. After a long time, she turned her head and sighed, saying, You are still young and don't know the dangers of the court. A family can live in peace and harmony, even if it's a little dull. It's much better than facing those deceitful battles every day. Li lowered his head but didn't speak. No one liked to live in deceit and conspiracy all day long. Compared with this, wasn't it more interesting to play with the children, Rui, and the proud Lolita at home? If you want stability, you must first endure turbulence. She looked outside the door. The two women were talking about something. She turned back and said, I think Ruaching is also thinking about you. Although Drunken Ink is here, you can't always ignore her. I can see that her heart is actually more bitter than anyone else. You can't let her down. I know. Li looked outside the door and nodded. I won't. She looked at Li, and a rare hint of resentment appeared on her face. Your father was so devoted back then. In order to elope with your mother, he didn't even want the inheritance of his family. Why is it that when it comes to you, you just have to provoke so many debts of love? An awkward expression appeared on Li Yi's face. Unable to refute, he could only remain silent. She patted the back of Li Yi's hand and said, All right, it's your good fortune to be able to gain the favor of so many wonderful people. I only hope that in the future, you won't hurt anyone's heart. After saying that, he stood up and said with a smile, When it comes to you, I can't help but talk too much. Accompany them well, I'm going back. Li stood up at the same time and saw her out. He watched as Chunchong walked out of the tea house across the street. A servant girl of the Chen estate helped her into the carriage. She did not want the old emperor to know about this, but she would never agree to let the Li family's country fall into the hands of others. In the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Her Highness nodded. That's right. No matter what, this country cannot fall into the hands of the King of Shu. This pavilion had become a place where the two of them talked in secret more and more frequently, because there was lake water everywhere, and the sound of waves was mixed in. Unless someone had clairvoyance in hearing, they would not be able to hear what they were talking about. He looked around. There seemed to be a flash of light in the trees by the shore of the lake, and disappeared in an instant. Emmingzi suddenly said, King Ning has returned to Qing'an Prefecture. Li looked back at her and asked, It is already June. They should have returned long ago. What is so strange about this? It is because King Ning has returned that it is strange. Emmingzi shook her head and said, This time, only King Ning has returned and taken the military seal. It is enough to mobilize 2,000 soldiers. What can 2,000 soldiers do? It is enough to confiscate the ancestral home of the Cui family in Qing'an Prefecture. As for rebellion, I'm afraid it is far from enough. Li Mingzhu looked at the surface of the lake for a long time before turning around. A hint of confusion appeared on her face. I suspect that Fu Huang and Ning Wangshu are hiding something from us, and from the court officials. I can't see it. In the low trees by the lake, Li Xian looked at the two people in the pavilion with their backs facing him, and murmured helplessly. With great difficulty, he saw Emmingzi turn around. He immediately became alert, and tightened his grip on the binoculars in his hands. I am pregnant with Father, the Emperor from the court officials? He frowned and murmured, You spoke so fast. How can I hear you clearly? A look of doubt surfaced on his face. What exactly was Mingzhu thinking? She had hidden it from Uncle Huang and the court officials. She seemed to be at a loss. Clatter. As if realizing something, he sucked in a cold breath. Shock appeared on his face. The binoculars in his hands suddenly fell to the ground, and he jumped out of the bushes. Li Yi and Emmingzi raised their heads and saw Li Xian, who was wearing a garland made of tree branches and decorated with a few small flowers. Surprise appeared on their faces at the same time. Chapter 905. Today, Li Xian was dressed in dark clothes, and the wreath of branches on his head was particularly eye-catching. If he smeared some camouflage paint on his face, he would look even more like the real deal. I saw what you said just now. He ran all the way here, panting heavily, and the shock on his face had not faded. Li Yi did not know why he was dressed like this and asked in surprise, What did you see? Li Xian pointed at the binoculars hanging around his neck, and Li Yi was even more confused. Li Xian looked at the two of them, and his eyes were filled with extreme surprise. I don't need to listen to what you're saying. I only need to look at your lips to know what you're saying. Li Yi looked at him, and his expression was slightly shocked. You've learned to read lips? Without waiting for Li Xian to nod, he remembered that during this period of time, whenever the two of them spoke, he would always stare at his own lips. Could it be that he was really learning to read lips? Then he looked at the binoculars hanging around his neck. Could it be that the purpose of him learning to read lips was to peep and eavesdrop? This guy, what was going on in his mind? Li Yi's lips moved, and he asked in disbelief. Did you see what I said just now? It's useless even if you scold me. Li Xian's gaze swept back and forth between the two of them, and he said, I've already seen what you've said just now. Li Yi and Imingzi looked at each other, and they both felt a headache coming on. The reason why the two of them chose this place was to avoid Li Xian. After all, with his character of wanting to see the world in chaos, if he knew about this matter, he might cause some trouble. But no matter how careful they were, they never expected that he would purposely learn to read lips. And the binoculars hanging around his neck were probably high-quality products from the Academy of Science. How could there be such a bored person in the world? You this is really too disgraceful. A worried expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He looked at Imingzi and said with a pained expression, You are the princess you too. How could you do such a thing? Looking at the extremely agitated Li Xian, Li Yi looked back at Imingzi and said, Why don't we sink into the lake? Looks like we can't hide it anymore. Li Yi sighed, and looked at Imingzi again and asked, You or me? Li Mingzhu waved her hand and sat on a stone chair to the side. She looked at the calm lake and said, Speak. Li nodded. He looked at Li Xian and asked again, What did you hear just now? You don't have to test me. Li Xian glanced at the two of them and said, If the imperial uncle, the court officials, and the entire world were to find out about this disgraceful and heinous act, the two of you would no longer have a place in the Jing kingdom. Li Yi shook his head. It seemed that he was really bored to a certain extent, and indeed learned to read lips. At this point, there was no need to test him anymore. Although the king of Shu has been chased to Shu province, and his reputation has been ruined, he is still the eldest son of the emperor. If something happens to his majesty, he will most likely make a comeback, and even ascend the throne. Li Yi looked at him, and said, The princes of his majesty have no talent or virtue. If the world falls into their hands, it will end in defeat sooner or later. We have come step by step to where we are today, and we can't let the court go back to its original path. Moreover, with the power in Mingzhu's hands, she will not have a good ending for any of the princes who succeed the throne. Hearing this, Li Xian's face darkened. How could he not understand this logic? Only Uncle Emperor was broad-minded enough to allow the eldest princess to rule the country, and hand over all the affairs of the country to her. Until now, most of the court officials had acquiesced to the eldest princess's existence. But if the new emperor succeeded the throne, he would definitely not allow these powers to be held in the hands of a princess. Even the Academy of Sciences would be out of his control. The precondition for their peace was that Uncle Huang was still in control of the country. Once he was gone, many people's fates would be turned upside down. However, although this was the truth, it had nothing to do with what they said. That was not the point. One was an unmarried princess, and the other was an important official with a family. The two of them were together secretly, and no one would find out, and everything would be fine. But now that Imingzi was pregnant, they could not hide it for long. Once this matter was made public, it would become the biggest scandal in the royal family, and the two of them would be condemned by everyone. Even if they could keep their lives, they would no longer have a place in the Jing kingdom. Why are you so careless? Li Xian looked at them exasperatedly and sighed and said, Go to a place where no one knows you, and don't come back. Let me finish first. Li Yi looked at him calmly, and Li Xian looked at him, lowered his head and said, Go ahead. Actually, Prince Jin is the most suitable person to inherit His Majesty's position. Li Yi looked in the direction of the arithmetic school, and said slowly, But he is too young. and can't take up the heavy responsibility, so why are you saying this to me at this time? Shut up, let me finish. After Li Xian completely shut up, Li Yi said again. So we have to push Mingzu to that position. Li Xian was stunned, and looked at him in surprise and asked, push to what position? His Majesty's position. Chapter 906. Such an important matter. Li Xian's face was gloomy as he paced back and forth in the pavilion. Occasionally he pointed at the two of them. Yu, Li Yi and Mingzu were both silent. Influenced by their traditional education and beliefs, this was the first time they had heard of this matter. It was indeed difficult for them to accept. How dare you not tell me? Li Xian slammed his palm on the stone table and asked angrily. Such an important matter. How dare you hide it from me? Are you not treating me as one of your own? The anger on his face only lasted for a moment, before disappearing in the next moment. He clapped his hands and said with a face full of surprise, why didn't I think of this idea before? To him, it would be best if he could maintain the current status quo. However, no matter who inherited the throne, with his identity and position, he would not have a good life in the capital. However, who was Mingzu? She had grown up with him, and the three heroes of the capital had gone through thick and thin together. It was as if they were wearing the same pants. Although it was the two of them who were wearing the same pants now, based on the current situation, if Mingzu could really sit on the throne, it would definitely be the best outcome. However, although she was also the child of the emperor, she was a woman. Would it be difficult for a woman to become the emperor? Thinking about it carefully, the dragon robe did not look good on her either. This matter is not certain yet. Let's not talk about it for now. Li Yi pressed on his shoulder to calm him down. He said, you cannot tell anyone about what happened today, including His Majesty, your father, mother, the crown princess, and your brother Shen. Don't worry, I know the severity of this matter. Other than the three of us, I will not let a fourth person know. Li Xian nodded solemnly, then said, based on what you said, the biggest obstacle in front of us now is the Cui family. The Cui family has done such a rebellious thing, and they are still jumping around in the court all day long. It is really annoying to see. Should we go all out? He turned his head to look. I think this lake in the academy is not bad. Although he didn't know from whom did Li Xian learn this unreliable idea of sinking into the lake, he was right about one thing. As long as the Cui family didn't fall, they wouldn't have peaceful days. This time, it was fine if they didn't make a move, but if they made a move, the Cui family wouldn't be able to make a comeback, once and for all. As for the secret between the two of them being known by him, it did not affect them much. Li Xian, who was born with a short brain, was muddle-headed on many things, but he had never messed up on a major matter. At least he knew that in the future, he wouldn't be like before, always causing trouble at the drop of a hat. He came out to wander around after learning half of lip reading, and ended up making such a big mistake. However, this incident also reminded him that there were even perverts in this world who specialized in lip reading and hid in the dark with binoculars to peep at him. In the future, no matter what he did, it was better to be extra careful. After stepping into the house, all the messy thoughts in his mind disappeared. Wife, children, sister-in-law, and the little servant girl who was about to grow up and was gradually getting rid of the silly adorable. This was another small world, blocking all the things that were incompatible with the word home outside. Mississippi Lu was holding a piece of paper in her hand and saying something to Rui. It was probably because she encountered some words that she didn't know. Rui was the kind of person who could calm down no matter what she did. When the two sisters were young, they also did literacy and other things, but it was probably useless for Mississippi Lu. Li Yi picked up a few pieces of paper that were messily placed on the table and looked at them. Most of them were about the Lu League. The Lu League had already formed a stable system. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was an organization. The elite disciples were all skilled in martial arts. They were famous martial arts masters on the master ranking list and the chivalry ranking list. As for other places, It was more of a relationship similar to a contract. There were many masters in the league, and they had strong financial support. They took what they needed from the people in the martial arts world and cooperated with tacit understanding. It could be said that they had completely changed the current situation of the martial arts world. As the leader of the Lu League, Mississippi Lu's growth was amazing. Of course, this did not refer to a specific part of her body. Other than physical growth, there was also psychological growth. Thinking back to 3 years ago, the girl in white who was riding on a horse and holding a sword, and now the girl who frowned and bit her thumb, staring at the piece of paper in front of her seriously, were like two different people. There was another stack of papers on the table. Li also flipped through them. They were all information about the Wu Kingdom. As the only country in the vicinity that had fallen into internal strife, although the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom was strong, there were too many rebels and traitors in the country. It could not be suppressed in a short time. The surrounding countries might have some other ideas besides watching them make a fool of themselves. Seeing him walk in, Rui seemed to have seen her savior. She hurriedly said, My husband is back. Quickly help Rui take a look at what's written on this. I've been having a headache these past few days. The reason why Rui had a headache was that Mississippi Lu would ask her whenever she encountered something that she did not understand. In fact, Rui only recognized a few more words than her. When it came to the meaning of poems and articles, she would also have a headache. As for why Mississippi Lu did not ask him directly, Li also felt strange. After Rui spoke, Mississippi Lu reluctantly handed the paper to him. Li glanced at it and knew the reason why Mississippi Lu had a headache. This was something similar to the Imperial Court spy report. The words and sentences were not like ordinary letters. It was very official and difficult to understand. It was normal for people like Mississippi Lu, who were still in the stage of literacy, to not understand it. Li looked at it and said, It says that Princess Duanrong of the Wu Kingdom joined forces with a traitor and conquered 2 provinces of the Wu Kingdom in a row. She was captured alive by the Imperial Court and will be executed in a few days. What? Mississippi Lu's expression changed dramatically. Of course it's a lie. Li put the paper aside and said, It's true that they conquered 2 provinces. They have a lot of soldiers under their command. They used to be in the military camp and have good strength. Now they are in a stalemate with the Imperial Court of the Wu Kingdom. Nothing will happen in a short time. Mississippi Lu took a deep breath, and her chest rose and fell a few times. She looked at him and said, Come here, I'll show you something good. Did she think he was stupid? If he went with her now, nothing good would come out of it. Li took Li Duan from Rui's arms. After such a long time of guidance, the 8-month-old little guy could make clearer father and mother. Of course, he still called Xiaonyang more often. Rui sat down beside him and said softly, I went to see Sister Zumo today. Li turned to look at her. I've already talked to Sister Zumo. She said that after a few days, she will move in with us. Li looked at her in surprise. She agreed? Rui looked at him in confusion and asked, Why not? Li suddenly doubted the meaning of life. He nagged her about this matter every day. All his efforts were not as good as a word from Rui. This was a bit too hurtful. When he walked out of the door gloomily, he met a little maid who came in. She looked up at him and said, Young master, second miss asked you to go to her room. She has a question to ask you. What question could he not ask just now? Why did he have to go to her room? Walking to Mississippi Lu's room on the other side, the door was open. Li knocked on the door and stepped in. Mississippi Lu sat at the table, looked up and said, Close the door. Li closed the door, then turned his head and asked in confusion, What's the problem? Why close the door? Chapter 907. At the door of Mississippi Lu's room, Xiaohuan leaned against a pillar, while munching on melon seeds. She carefully listened to the movements inside the room. Inside the room, Li was thrown onto the bed. He covered his buttocks and glared at Mississippi Lu angrily. He said he had a question for her. He was just curious why she closed the door. It turned out that she was going to beat him up. What a heartless fellow. To think that he was so kind and considerate of her. Li looked at her warily and threatened. If you continue to act like this, I won't accompany you to the Wu Kingdom. What did you say? Mississippi Lu was stunned. Her hand that was about to fall stopped in the air. She asked, What did you say just now? Say it again? I was thinking of accompanying you to the Wu Kingdom, after I'm done with my work. Now, I need to think about it. His original intention was not to go to the Wu Kingdom. Counting the days, Lin Wanru should have reached the Qi Kingdom by now. The business there was about to start. In this year, the situation in the fringe had also changed greatly. Every once in a while there would be news. He had to go and take a look. Since Mississippi Lu was so concerned about her precious disciple, he might have to make a trip to the Wu Kingdom. Of course, before leaving the capital, he had to solve all the remaining problems. To the Wu Kingdom? Mississippi Lu's beautiful eyes lit up. She asked when. I was thinking of a month or two. Li shook his head and said, But now, I'm not going. You. Mississippi Lu's face was filled with anger. The slender hand that was about to fall fiercely stopped in midair fell again. But this time, it was with a gentle force. A faint smile appeared on her face. She asked with concern, Does it still hurt? Li did not have the chance to enjoy Mississippi Lu's gentle massage. He jumped up from the bed and ran out of the door at an unbelievable speed. As he ran out, he grabbed Xiaohuan's melon seeds. He ate them while thinking, So gentle, so gentle. Mississippi Lu is crazy. She's really crazy. Miss, when are we moving over? Miss, do you want me to help you pack? Miss, if we move over, what about Sister Ruoqing? Since elder Sister Ruoqing is going there, Xiaozhu will also go there, right? Zheng Zumo, who was embroidering a wedding dress, raised her head and glanced at Xiao Chui, who was carrying a small bag and wandering in front of her for almost an hour. Zheng Zumo lowered her head again and said, If you really can't wait, move over first. Anyway, there are other maids in the manor. Xiao Chui hurriedly put down the small bundle and came over with a smile. How could Xiao Chui understand Miss better than the other maids? Of course, I want to be with Miss. Goddess Luo Shui waved her hand and said, Stay away from me. You're blocking the light. After chasing Xiao Chui away, he lowered his head and looked at a pattern on the wedding dress. He stared blankly for a long time, before a vexed expression appeared on his face. Oh no! I forgot what kind of needle technique to use on this piece. She put the wedding dress and the needle and thread aside, and walked towards Ruoqing's room. She remembered that when she was teaching her yesterday, she had demonstrated the steps on another brocade handkerchief. During the day, there was usually no one in her room. Sometimes there were too many things to do, and she might not come back at night. She pushed open the door, and very quickly found the brocade handkerchief on the table. She picked it up and looked at it for a while. Not long after, she remembered the steps and put the brocade handkerchief back. Just as she was about to leave, her footsteps suddenly stopped. She turned around and looked at the bed. On the bed, under the pillow, the corner of a book was exposed. She was startled. This was the booklet that was pressed under the pillow by elder sister Ruoqing? For her to hide it like this, it must be something very important or private. Even if the two of them were very close, it would not be good to take it out and look at it when she was not around. She shook her head and walked in the direction of the door. When she walked to the door, her footsteps stopped again, and she looked back at the bedside. How about just taking a look? She looked left and right, closed the door like a thief, and returned to the bedside. She carefully took out the booklet under the pillow. There were no words on the cover. She carefully flipped to the next page. The first year of Jing He, the first day of the 7th month. It was indeed elder sister Ruoqing's diary. She knew that Ruoqing had the habit of writing diaries since she was young. Although she did not write every day, she had accumulated a few thick books. At that time, she actually wanted to peek at elder sister Ruoqing's little secrets. However, Ruoqing hid it very well. After a few unsuccessful attempts, she gave up. At this moment, although she was a little frightened, she was actually a little excited that her wish had been fulfilled. Her gaze quickly moved up. The first year of Jing He, the first day of the 7th month. What happened in that year's 7th month? That sour scholar wrote a love poem for her, and was chased out of the jade courtyard by her mother. This matter was actually written in by her. The matter of him secretly eating osmanthus cake. So it was at that time that she was discovered, poem from beyond the heavens. What nameless scholar? It was clearly that annoying fellow. Mid-Autumn Festival. The matter on the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival. That fellow. She slowly flipped through the pages, and a smile appeared on her pretty face. These were all things that they had experienced together in the past. Now that she recalled it, those memories and feelings from that time would surge out from her mind. She murmured a few words. That annoying fellow. Why is he everywhere? Even elder sister Ruoqing's diary. She lowered her head and continued to flip through the pages. As the pages turned, the smile on her face gradually froze and dissipated. Then, it became a little pale, and a deep sense of loss and confusion began to appear in her eyes. Wan Ruoqing walked into the courtyard and saw Xiao Chui sitting alone in the courtyard. She looked around and asked, Xiao Chui, where is Zuenmao? Xiao Chui was holding a triangular prism in her hand. After watching the sunlight pass through it, it became colorful. She was playing happily under the sun. Hearing Wan Ruoqing's voice, she put down the thing in her hand and stood up. She said, Elder sister Ruoqing is back. Miss was here just now. She should have returned to her room now. She looked back and saw Zheng Zuinmo walking out of her room. She walked over and said, Miss, elder sister Ruoqing is back. Wan Ruoqing walked over and said with a smile, The fish he sent yesterday is said to be a tribute from the palace. It's a river fish without many bones. He was worried that they wouldn't know how to cook it, so he told me how to cook it. It's been hot these days. Although it's frozen, it's better to eat it as soon as possible. Lee is so good to Mississippi. He sends fish every few days. The tribute from the palace is really much more delicious than the ones in the market. Xiao Chui said with a smile. Seeing Xiao Zhu holding her treasure and looking it up and down, she immediately trotted over and said anxiously, This is a gift from Lee. Xiao Zhu curled her lips and walked around the stone table with her. So what if he gave it to you? Can I play with it? Xiao Chui said with dissatisfaction. Lee gave it to me first. I haven't let you play with it yet. You are robbing me. Xiao Zhu stopped and looked at her. Are we still good sisters? Just let me play with it. Xiao Chui also stopped and hesitated. After a moment she said, Okay, but after you play with it, you have to give it back to me. Wan Ruoqing looked at the door of her room, and then at her. She asked in confusion, Why did you come out of my room? Zheng Zimo smiled and said, I'm stupid. I forgot the needle technique you taught me yesterday, so I went in and looked at it again. It's okay. If you forget, I will teach you again. A woman only gets married once in her life. The wedding dress must be embroidered well. You can't be careless. She smiled and said, Wait a moment. I will go to the room to get the needle and thread. Zheng Zimo nodded and walked to the stone table in a daze. Beside her, Xiao Chui looked at Xiao Zhu who was playing with the prism under the sun. She couldn't help but laugh. Stupid. You don't even know how to do such a simple thing. I will teach you. She looked at the two girls who were laughing and scolding each other, then looked at Wan Ruoqing who walked into the room. She felt that the wedding dress in her hand was a bit dazzling. Go back to sleep. Zheng Zimo pulled her arm. I want you to talk to me. Before Wan Ruoqing could nod, she was dragged in and sat on the edge of the bed. Zheng Zimo hugged her arm and rested her head on her shoulder. She murmured, I don't want to leave you. You're about to get married, but you're still so childish. Sister Ruoqing, I'm sorry. She suddenly raised her head and looked into Wan Ruoqing's eyes. I stole your favorite thing. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, It should have been yours in the first place. What's mine is yours. What's mine is yours. After a moment of silence, Zheng Zimo suddenly smiled. She hugged her waist and said, Hee, what I said today was all a lie. How could I steal something that my beloved sister Ruoqing likes? Don't you like my poetry book very much? I'll give it to you. Huh? Seeing her sudden change, Wan Ruoqing was dazed and looked at her with a confused expression. What are you talking about? She hugged Wan Ruoqing, and the two of them fell down together. Sleep. Wan Ruoqing struggled to get up. I'm going back to my room. She flipped over like a spoiled child and pressed Wan Ruoqing under her body. No, I want to sleep with you in my arms tonight, and in the future. You're about to get married. How can you? I don't care. I want in the future. I want forever. All right. If you say forever, then forever. Wan Ruoqing said helplessly. Then her body stiffened. She blushed and whispered, sleep. Don't touch. Goddess Luo Shui grabbed her hand and put it on a soft spot on her body. She murmured, now we're even. Li looked at Mississippi Lu, who was behind him, helplessly and said, don't follow me. I've said it 10 times. When things in the capital are settled, I'll go with you. Why are you in such a hurry? Mississippi Lu asked lightly. What else do you have to deal with? The Chui family. If the Chui family doesn't fall, how can we leave in peace? It's not like you don't know what happened a while ago. This kind of person is insane and has no bottom line. He can do anything. You don't want the people and things related to us in the capital to be targeted by the Chui family after we leave, right? Mississippi Lu didn't ask him again this time. She turned around and walked outside. Li was stunned for a moment and asked, where are you going? Mississippi Lu replied lightly, I'll help you. Li grabbed Mississippi Lu's arm and pulled her back. He regretted telling her about it earlier. Fong stood not far away and watched the joke. Compared to Li, who was having a headache, he was obviously in a much better mood. Recently, Fong could be said to be riding on the crest of success. When he spoke, his back was much straighter. Mrs. Fong and her sworn sister, Miss Xiao, had just come back from shopping. Fong was carrying a lot of bags of various sizes in his hands, but his face was full of bright smiles. Mississippi. Lu Yi had been investigating an important case recently, and he must have made some progress. He gave up the idea of going out, poured 2 cups of tea, and sat down in the hall. Lordly. After Lu Yi came in, he first cupped his hands and bowed to him. At Li Yi's signal, he sat across from him. Li Yi raised his teacup and asked, has there been progress on that case? Lu Yi nodded. I've had people follow Qin Yu for the past few days. Lord Li's guess is correct. There is indeed something wrong with the Qin family. What did you find out? Outside the capital, a manor owned by the Qin family under Qin Yan's name, there are some problems. Lu Yi's eyes were sharp. The manor is heavily guarded. Even the masters of the Secret Service can't sneak in. It doesn't look like a private garden for recreation at all. Usually, the people who enter and leave the manor are the nobles of the capital. The more it is so, the more suspicious it is. Li Yi was surprised. Even the masters of the Secret Service can't sneak in? Although there were no masters of the Grandmaster level in the Secret Service, there were many guests who were only a step away from the Grandmaster level. If even the masters of the Secret Service couldn't sneak in, it could be seen how heavily guarded the manor was. In the entire capital, perhaps only the Imperial Palace and the Department of Heavenly Punishment could compare. Lu Yi shook his head. He thought of something and said, in the process of investigating Qin Yu, I discovered some suspicious points. What suspicious points? Lu Yi thought for a moment. Lordly, do you know that a few years ago, Qin Yu raped his own aunt and committed the crime of incest, causing the capital to denounce him? Li Yi nodded. I heard that the woman he raped couldn't bear the humiliation and committed suicide. Later on, the Qin family suppressed the matter. Even though Prime Minister Qin is the current minister of the right, he has no way of influencing the people. How could the Qin family suppress the matter? Lu Yi shook his head and said, in this matter, the Chui family used the power of the king of Shu and countless dignitaries in the capital to suppress this rebellious matter. Even the empress in the palace contributed a lot. Li Yi knew that Lu Yi would not bring up this matter for no reason, so he waited for him to continue. The woman he raped was named Lin Lian. Before entering the Qin family, she was a slightly famous actress in the capital. Later on, she caught the eye of Prime Minister Qin's 5th son, Qin He. Not long after he took her in as a concubine, that incident happened. Lin Lian is actually not the girl's real name. She was just a disciple of a performer with the surname Lin in the capital. She changed her surname after she became her master. That Lin Lian passed away a long time ago, and the disciples she took in her lifetime all had different experiences. That Miss Lin Lian is the oldest of her disciples and has inherited her acting skills. Her youngest disciple has completely inherited her skills in the art of the zither and has even surpassed her. She is extremely famous in the capital. Li Yi sighed and said, her youngest disciple, the girl with outstanding skills on the guqin, her stage name is Lin Shuangshuang, right? Lu Yi nodded and said, yes, it is the deceased Lin Shuangshuang. Lin Qin, who reported to the Ministry of Justice, is also their sister. The common people only know that Chu Ping killed Lin Shuangshuang, but they have overlooked one thing. Lin Shuangshuang was already seriously ill. Even without that incident, she only had a few months to live. Lu Yi shook his head and said, this is not all suspicious. Official Zeng said that there was no such thing as a criminal. This matter was originally a trap set up by the Cui family for the Chu family. The Cui family bribed Lin Shuangshuang in advance, but their original intention was not to use Lin Shuangshuang's death to threaten the Chu family. That night, someone saw the fifth master of the Qin family, Qin He, in a restaurant across from the Fine Sound Pavilion drunk. Official Zeng once said that when there are too many coincidences, it is no longer a coincidence. Li Yi shook his head and said, so this was not a trap set up by the Cui family for the Chu family. Lu Yi looked at him and nodded. This was a trap set up by someone for the Cui family and the Chu family. If the Chu family is crippled, the Cui family will lose an arm. Lu Yi put down his teacup and said, although Prime Minister Qin has not had much contact with the Cui family in this past year, the relationship between the two families cannot be severed. If something happens to the Qin family, the Cui family will really lose an arm. He raised his head and muttered, this fifth master Qin, what does he want to do? The Fong family. The wife of the Fong family, and the girl walked into the house arm in arm. Fong came in carrying bags of various sizes. Close the door. The wife of the Fong family suddenly said, it's broad daylight, why close the door? Fong muttered. He put down the things in his hands and closed the door. The wife of the Fong family let go of the girl's hand and looked at the two of them. With a cold expression she asked, when did you start? Chapter 9:10. Fong's face changed. He raised his head and opened his mouth, but he didn't say anything. When the woman heard this, her body trembled, and her face turned pale in an instant. She looked at Fong Lucier and said in panic, sister. Don't. Fong Lucier waved her hand and said, don't call me that. I don't have a sister like you. Little Red's lips moved, but before she could say the next word, a mountain-like figure had already stood in front of her. Fong looked up at his wife and said in a low voice, it's all my idea. Blame me. Fong Lucier pointed her finger at him and said in a trembling voice, you really have an affair. Fong Lucier was stunned and looked at her in disbelief. You just tricked me. Well, you're really capable. Fong Lucier picked up the broom on the side and fiercely whipped him. You brought a fox spirit to our house, but you're still in the right, aren't you? Little Red's eyes were full of tears. She desperately stood in front of Fong and cried, sister, don't hit Fong Lucier. If you want to hit him, hit me. It's all my fault. I seduced him. Fong Lucier's broom didn't fall. She collapsed on the ground and cried, why is my life so bitter? I can't live like this anymore. Fong Lucier's face showed a painful expression. He scratched his hair hard, and then loosened it powerlessly. Li Yi and Lu Yi walked out of the mansion. Lu Yi thought for a moment and said, after all, it's a serious matter. If we don't have enough evidence, we can't do anything. I'll ask them to keep an eye on it, and try to get some useful clues. Don't bother. Li Yi waved to the sloppy old man not far away and said, Sue, I need your help with something. 10 drumsticks. The sloppy old man had recently understood that White Rabbit creamy candies was not a long-term solution. Under the influence of his second granduncle, he had a special liking for drumsticks. This was not the only thing he had learned from his second granduncle. Yesterday, He had even asked Li Yi to make him a rocking chair that was exactly the same as his second granduncle's. Li Yi nodded. Deal. It was just cooking once. Xiao Huan's body was still growing during this period of time. She should eat more good food to nourish herself. After 2 years, it would be difficult to nourish herself again. The sloppy old man glanced at Lui Chang. What are you waiting for? Let's go. Lui looked at him. Li Yi waved his hand and said, If there's anything, tell Sue. You guys just have to wait for the news. Grandmasters could be said to be the pinnacle of martial artists. Ordinary martial artists could only be found but not sought after. Using them to gather information was definitely a waste of their talents. After sending them off, when he was about to walk back, he saw a figure squatting in the corner with his head buried between his knees. There was no sound at all. Li thought for a moment and asked again, What about drunken ink? Fong looked anxious. I went there too. Little Cui said she didn't go there either. She didn't go back last night. She didn't bring any money with her. She doesn't know anyone in the capital. Where could she go? Don't worry. Li Yi said as he walked out of the door. Think about it first. Where else could she have gone? I'll ask the brothel and the government to inquire about the news. Outside the door, Fong Liusher's face was pale, and her expression was extremely remorseful. Seeing Fong come out, she went to greet him and wanted to say something. But Fong just glanced at her and left in a hurry. In the Qin family, Qin Yin looked at his son who walked in from outside and asked with a sullen face, You didn't return last night. What did you do? I went to find a friend to drink. Qin Yu looked drunk. He shook his head and said, If there's nothing else, I'll go back to my room first. I'm sleepy. Bastard, this bastard. Qin Yin looked at his swaying back and forth as he left. He waved his hand and shook his head helplessly. Has everything been taken care of? Passing through a moon door, Qin Yu's drunkenness disappeared, and he asked in a low voice. The person beside him immediately said, Little Duke, don't worry. The person has been moved. This time they'll definitely come empty-handed. A bunch of idiots. Qin Yu twitched the corner of his mouth, and then a trace of coldness appeared on his face. He murmured, Li Yi, County Marquis Li, Dr. Li. I'll see how long you can be proud for. The coldness flashed across his face and he asked again, That woman last night? The person nodded repeatedly. She's been sent to your room. Qin Yu didn't speak again. He walked to the door and pushed it open. Seeing the empty room, his face instantly darkened. Where is she? Chapter 9:11. Little Red had disappeared. Not only had Li Yi made arrangements for the brothel, but he had also informed the county government and even the secret intelligence office. They had already acted quickly. All they could do now was wait. There was no news, but Lu Yi soon came. There's a traitor in the secret intelligence office. Lu Yi's face was as calm as still water. He said slowly, When we brought people there were no traces left. There were only a few servants of the Qin family, but they had something on them. After all, that was the house of an important official in the court. It's a bit troublesome. Li looked at him and asked, You didn't find any clues at all? Lu Yi shook his head. One night is enough for them to move the people away. Other clues are not enough to be used as evidence. There are people watching the surroundings, and there are no suspicious people coming in or out. There should be a secret passage inside, but we have no reason to search it now. What about the traitor? Li asked. He committed suicide. Lu Yi shook his head and said, That person has been in the secret intelligence office for nearly 20 years. When we found him, he bit the poison sac and didn't say a word. I see. Li nodded and asked again, Do you know which family the carriages that go in and out usually belong to? There are records of them. Lu Yi replied, then raised his head and said, But sir, with just these, I'm afraid it's difficult to form evidence. Moreover, those people are all nobles in the capital, and their status is extraordinary. Li Yi waved his hand. These are enough. The secret intelligence office had a special status in the court, but it was still troublesome to encounter such things. Lu Yi would have a headache later. Breaking into a private house was not a big deal in other places. But this was the capital, and everything had to be done according to the law. Moreover, the court had changed the law not long ago against the opposition of countless nobles. If the court protected the secret intelligence office breaking into an official's house, it would undoubtedly be contradictory. It would give those people a reason, and maybe something more serious would happen. To be honest, even Li Yi himself didn't expect that they could plant people in the secret intelligence office. He had to admit that he had underestimated the Cui family. This time, Lu Yi had returned without any results. They would definitely be more careful, and even stop all actions. If they wanted to collect evidence through normal channels, it would be very difficult. Crack. In the end, Li Yi did not manage to keep the teapot. You didn't find him? The sloppy old man slammed his palm on the new table, causing it to shatter. The teapot on top of it also fell to the ground and broke into several pieces. Are they messing with me? The anger on the sloppy old man's face didn't last long. He quickly revealed a smile, stroked his beard and muttered, "Interesting, interesting. How many years has it been since I've encountered something so interesting?" The smile on his face was like that of a benevolent elder, but the servant girl who came in to clean up the mess couldn't help but shiver. She felt her body was a little cold, and her hands moved a little faster. Cui family. Cui Qingming sighed and said, "What a pity. In the past 20 years, there was only one spy left in the secret intelligence office. Now there's no one left." Someone beside him comforted. "Second brother, there's no need to sigh. As the saying goes, there's no gain without loss. Although we've lost that spy, the secret intelligence office recklessly intruded into an official's residence. This is not a small crime. The imperial court has reformed the law, and it can't be overturned. With Lu Yi around, the Ministry of Justice is almost unable to interfere. If we get rid of him, it will be much more convenient to do things in the future." Cui Qingming nodded and said, "Let them be prepared. This time, if we don't pull Lu Yi down completely, we won't rest." The Cui clan hated Lu Yi to the bone. At that time, it was precisely because of Lu Yi's meddling that caused all their arrangements and deployments towards the Chu clan to turn into ash. The Chu clan had fallen, and the Cui clan had lost an arm. If this matter were to implicate the Qing clan, and those people, then they would really arrive at the end of their rope. At this point, they almost understood that it was unlikely for His Majesty to summon the King of Shu back. But if the status quo was maintained, it might not be a bad thing for them. Once His Majesty passed away, who was more suitable than the King of Shu in terms of identity and status, when the position of the Eastern Palace was vacant? If it really came to that, it would be much easier for them to do things. Cui Qingming showed a sarcastic smile and said, "I really want to see with my own eyes what expression County Marquis Li has now." Li Yi was naturally anxious, but it was not because of the secret intelligence office. As long as he knew the facts, the evidence was not important. What he was worried about was that if something really happened to Little Red, Old Fong's family would be ruined. However, the brothel and the government were not omnipotent. Even if they were to find clues, it would take time. Instead of searching around like a headless fly, it was better to wait here. Some people of the Cui family were also anxious. "Little Duke, I've asked the front and back doors, and no strange woman came in or out. That woman must be hiding somewhere in the mansion. If you look hard, you can definitely find her." Qing Yu glanced at him coldly and said, "Go and look for her. Go and look for her in every room in the mansion." The servant was stunned and asked again, "Go and look for her in every room?" "Prime Minister and the masters." Qing Yu kicked him and said, "Except for those few, don't let anyone go." In a remote and messy woodshed in Qing's mansion, a woman looked at the figure covered in a black cloak and said gratefully, "Thank you for saving me, my benefactor." "Little Red, why are you here?" A hoarse voice came from the black cloak, and it was not difficult to tell that it was a woman's voice. "I was caught by them," the woman replied. Then she realized something and asked in shock, How do you know my name is Little Red?" The person in the black cloak put down the hood of her cloak. It was an ordinary-looking woman, but there was a long scar on her face, which looked a little scary. The woman looked at her and said, "I went down the mountain with Uncle Fong and saw you on the road." Little Red's expression was a little excited. She grabbed her sleeve and asked, You know Big Brother Fong?" The woman with the long scar on her face did not answer this question. Instead, she looked at her and said, "This place is very remote. They can't find this place. You hide here first. I'll think of a way to spread the news." As soon as she finished speaking, there was a sudden urgent knock on the door. The woman's expression changed. She hurriedly let Little Red hide in a large vat and threw her black cloak inside. She carried a bundle of firewood and walked to the door. She asked, "Who is it?" "The firewood is not ready yet." "Wait a moment." A rough voice came from outside the door. "Open the door. The community sends warmth." Chapter 9:12. Hearing the voice outside, the woman with the scar on her face calmed down a bit and asked, "Wu, brother Wu?" "It's me, Xiao Mei. Open the door. There's not enough time." Wu Er's voice came from outside. Lu Mei opened the door and looked at the man outside. She asked in confusion, "What's not enough time?" "There's not enough time to explain." Wu Er closed the door and said, "Hurry and call the girl out. Those people are coming." As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of messy footsteps could be heard. Lu Mei's expression changed greatly. Wu Er closed the door and grabbed her arm. He said in a low voice, "Let's go. I'll tell you in detail later." Search. A group of Qin family guards kicked open the door of the woodshed and searched inside and out. They also looked at the woodpile, water tanks, and other places where people could hide. But they didn't find anything. The leader waved his hand and said, "Search other places." Qin Manor back residence. Wu Er led the two of them through the narrow path between the rock garden and the wall. Lu Mei hesitated for a moment and finally couldn't help but ask, "Brother Wu, how did you know?" "Now is not the time to talk about this." Wu Er quickly said, "They are searching the entire Qin Manor. It's not safe to hide there. I'll take you to a safe place." Xiao Hong followed and said in a weak voice, "Thank you, big brother." "No need to thank me." Wu Er smiled and said, "If you want to thank someone, thank Fifth Lord. Otherwise, such a beautiful girl would have been defiled by that beast Qin Yu again." The three of them were in a deserted garden in the Qin family. The weeds were as tall as a person, and they followed the narrow path between the rock garden. They didn't encounter anyone along the way. Somewhere, Wu Er pushed open a small door. After the three of them walked in and closed it from the inside, he let out a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Okay, we're safe now." The small door was clearly the back door of a house. Wu Er took the two of them to the front yard. A middle-aged man was already standing there waiting. Wu Er walked over and said with a smile, "Fifth Lord, I've brought the girl." Fifth Lord nodded and looked at the girl. "I'm afraid it's not easy to send you out from here. Do you have any family in the capital?" Xiao Hong thought for a moment and was about to speak. She paused and said after a long time, "Just tell the Madam of Jade Courtyard that I'm here, and she will know what to do." Fifth Lord shook his head and said, "If that's all, I'm afraid it won't work. Miss doesn't know where this place is. Open the door, open the door." Suddenly, the sound of knocking came from outside the courtyard. The knocking was so forceful that it seemed like the entire door was going to crack. Qin Clan's fifth master glanced at Wu Er, who immediately understood. He walked over and whispered, "Follow me." The fifth master of the Qin family walked to the door and opened it. He asked, "Why did you use so much force?" "Fifth Lord," the head guard first casually greeted him and said, "A servant girl in the mansion ran away, and now the whole mansion is being searched. Of course, we are not suspecting Fifth Lord, but just doing a routine search. Fifth Lord, you don't mind, right?" The fifth master of the Qin family waved his hand and said, "Go ahead. Be careful and don't break anything." They swaggered in. The fifth master of the Qin family stood in the yard and watched them rummaging in the yard. When they went back into the house, he hurriedly followed them and said, "Be careful. If you break anything, you can't afford to pay for it." They didn't dare to be too arrogant. After searching for a while, the leader knocked on a wall on the inside and pushed it hard. he asked. There won't be a secret door here, right? Fifth Master Qin smiled. How could it be? Unable to find anything here, the guard waved his hand. Let's go to the next place. Fifth Master Qin followed them out. After closing the door, he walked back. He knocked on the wall that the guard had pushed 3 times, paused for a moment, and then hurriedly knocked 3 more times. A moment later, a heavy sound came from behind the wall, and the wall slowly turned to an angle. Wu Er came out from behind the wall, wiped the sweat from his forehead and complained, Fifth Master, this wall really needs to be repaired. It's so hard to switch it on and off. Fifth Master Qin waved his hand and said, sit down and rest for a while. Wu Er sat down at the table, picked up a teapot, and gulped down a mouthful of tea. Then he asked, Fifth Master, we saved Miss Hong. What should we do now? It's impossible for us to send her out alone. Fifth Master Qin shook his head, looked at him, and said, go find this girl's family and report it to the authorities. Ah! Wu Er was stunned and said, report to the authorities? But Fifth Master, this is the Qin family. We should have a bottom line. Fifth Master Qin looked at him, shook his head and said, what's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong. This has nothing to do with whether I'm a member of the Qin family or not. Fifth Master, you. Wu Er stood up with a solemn expression. He bowed to him and said, you're really a good person. It's just for justice. Wu Er nodded and asked, which official should I report to? The capital magistrate or the capital governor? Fifth Master Qin looked at him, smiled and said, report whichever one you like. I believe you know what to do. Wu Er patted his chest and said, don't worry, Fifth Master. I won't let you down. Wu Er strode out. Fifth Master Qin looked at the 2 of them and said, I'm afraid you'll have to suffer for a while. The 2 women thanked him repeatedly. Fifth Master Qin looked behind him and saw that the gambling wall was still tilted. Wu Er walked over leisurely with his hands behind his back. He pointed at the bailiffs and said, this is the yard of the second master. How can there be people hiding here? Be careful. Don't break anything. You can't afford to pay for it. The leading man's face darkened. He pointed in a direction and said, go over there and find them. Over there. That's the residence of the third master. The third master is a 5th-level official in the imperial court. He's very honest. It's impossible for him to hide people. Go over there. That's the residence of the servants. You can go if you want. Anyway, I don't think it's a good place to hide people. The leading man looked back at him and asked, then where do you think it's a good place to hide people? Wu Er shook his head and glanced in a certain direction. Then how do I know? The leading man pointed at that place and asked, what's that place? That place? Wu Er glanced at it and shook his head. I don't know. After saying that, he walked away leisurely. The leading man suddenly waved his hand and pointed in that direction. Search. In a deserted garden in the backyard of Qin's mansion, the bailiffs found 2 women behind a rockery. When one of the women saw the man dressed as a bailiff, her face lit up with joy. She took 2 quick steps forward and then stopped. She knelt on the ground and said in a loud voice, Your Excellency, you must seek justice for me. Seeing this scene, the expressions of the people of Qin's family, who followed them, changed greatly. Some people in the distance looked even more frightened. They had searched this place many times just now. There was no one at all. Little Duke, it's bad. They found the woman in the backyard. A servant of Qin's family rushed into Qin Yu's residence and said in a panic. Qin Yu clenched his fists, and his face was extremely gloomy. The servant said anxiously, Little Duke, it's better to hide first. You won't be able to leave in a while. Qin Yu looked outside, loosened his clenched fists, and turned into the backyard. In the capital, when night gradually fell, a dry well in the courtyard of a house 2 streets away from Qin's mansion suddenly lit up with a faint light. The rope tied to a tree outside the well swayed for a long time before a figure climbed out of the well with difficulty. He looked back at the well and said in a low voice, Hurry up. Take advantage of the darkness to go to the Chui family. In the courtyard, A figure who had been sitting for a long time sighed. Why did you come so late? I've been waiting for you for a long time. Chinyu suddenly turned his head. Who is it? He only saw a vague figure in the darkness, and suddenly felt a pain in his neck. His whole body weakly fell to the ground. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.